Hello everyone, my name is Armia and today we are continuing my Battletech streak with a primer on the clans by Text Talks. You guys really liked the first Text Talks, so I figured like, hey, let's do a little bit more of that. Especially since, right now we kind of have the primer to the inner sphere already. We're probably gonna have a primer on the periphery at some point. But there's also a third group that's very important in Battletech, and that's of course the clans. So, today we're going to be taking a look at those dirty clanners. Meh. Okay. I'm being a brat. I'm being a brat. I actually quite like a lot of clan designs, but let's just get right into it and let's see what the text says. I do love me some space like designs like that, just like the shot of space into Station 13. Oh God.
Howdy, folks. Please take your seats. I'm glad you could find your.
Okay, so for those who don't know Space Station 13, this will not land at all, but the fact that we get a clown in the background is quite something. Like just right away. I didn't expect to get Space Station 13 in my clan, but okay. I'll send no but chance.
Way to the classroom today. My apologies, as the head of personnel had to scramble to put this shitbox together, but for our purposes, it will work just fine. We should be fine assuming the station doesn't explode, which it almost certainly doesn't with terrifying regularity.
Like, for those who don't know Space Station 13, it's a multiplayer game where basically you are supposed to run a station and hopefully not make it break apart. It has a lot of goofy stuff in it, like the clown, whose job it is to troll other people, basically. It's an interesting game with a lot of let's call it colorful communities.
Anyways, let me log in with my ID here.
Also, God, Texas.
We'll just ignore that for now. Eyes up front.
Tex's voice is
please
fantastic.
Ignore the noise.
Also, I realize this is episode 10. I realize I could have started at episode 1. But I felt like, going from the inner sphere to the clans makes a lot of sense. And then going to the periphery from there also makes a lot of sense. Like, personally, I would love to see... Maybe I need to just make that myself. Like, a few videos on, like, Auriga and the other periphery factions and stuff like that. Because they are really interesting.
So initially, this lecture was going to be relatively brief, as I had originally wanted to talk about every Inner Sphere mech warrior's worst nightmare. These assholes from beyond the deep periphery and their attempts to party crash the Inner Sphere one battle at a time. This lecture was originally focused on clanner elementals only, their power armor, battle history, and then afterwards to let you guys decide whether they were either first-rate murder hobo shot troops or merely convenient footballs for your assault lance. We even had a good tagline for this initial production.
Maybe a little bit of both, though, because, like, I feel like elementals vary so heavily in power, where, like, sometimes they are just literal nightmares, and then sometimes they just suck. Like, there's no real in between, I feel like.
But that was before I read my mountain of messages, my backlog of emails, and the numerous other inquiries I had received. You see, I had made what we call in the education business a fucking boo-boo. I'd put the spotlight of historical inquiry onto a big subject, and as a result, people had a multitude of follow-up questions. Which I suppose is my own damn fault. After all, I'd followed up a major history lecture two-parter with a relatively brief history on a middling, if borderline, generic General Motors product.
Ah, the blackjack. By the way, the blackjack, the blackjack, by the way, features in Battletech's HBS's Battletech, and It is the most okay mech there as well. Like, it's fine. It's you know, it's nothing spectacular. It has a bunch of guns. It's like, yeah, it's decent. Also, yeah, some of you guys told me that apparently Tex almost got sued for mentioning the blackjack, which is really funny. Like, apparently one of General Motors people was like a fan or something and sent them an email. So I definitely have to take a look at that because that sounds really funny.
Through communication during office hours, I became distinctly aware that my audience wanted to know what in the hell became of the SLDF in the years and decades after the conclusion of the American Civil War, and
Maybe I should have started with the Star League now I think about it. Oh well.
how they had fared in the deep periphery on their exodus from the inner sphere. The main question was this: how in the hell did the battle-scarred survivors of the legendary SLDF slowly turn into, well, these guys? Having heard your questions and acknowledging fully I left a great many threads hanging, I adjusted the scope of today's lecture accordingly. Today,
Okay.
we are going to discuss the eventual fate of General Alexander Kerensky, his family, and the remnants of the SLDF who followed him into the unknown.
I just realized I opened a massive, like, can of worms doing this. It's like, yeah, the clans. Oh, right, the Star League. Oh, right, Kerensky. Oh, right. Oh, God. Oh, no. Is this like a rabbit hole I'm just being, like, pulled down into?
We're going to talk about how, out there in the deepest reaches of the periphery, they forged their own destiny, and how the needs of survival changed them, and, well, how they eventually decided to return to the inner sphere to right past wrongs. So, that being said, welcome to the lecture on Exodus to Elementals, a relatively brief primer on the clans.
I love how he says a brief primer and it's 2 hours long. This is going to be a long video, folks. Strap in. Also, I just want to mention this real quick. So folks asked me, like, how much do you actually know, Armia, of Battletech? And I would say, like, so I've played HBS's Battletech before. I've played it through. So I obviously know, like, a little bit about the periphery and, like, the succession wars and that kind of stuff. I've played some MechWarrior 5. I've played some MechWarrior Online. But I'm far from an expert, I would say. Like, I'm not completely new to the whole thing. I know, like, a lot of the big outlines. And if you ask me a mech name, there's a decent chance that I'll know it. But, you know, I'm far from an expert.
Brief by my definition anyways. Then again, I suppose my tenure does allow me to say whatever the fuck I want. I must offer my sincerest apologies ahead of time for those who will want me to cover everything in fine detail, as the scope of this lecture only allows for me to hit the main points, and at times only briefly so. I assure you, many of these subjects will be covered in far greater detail as time and interest allows through future lectures. This lesson itself is intended to serve as a primer for understanding the clans and their ways. I apologize as well to those kept waiting for the development of this lecture, as I had taken a mandated sabbatical from these projects for my own well-being.
You know what? Good on them for forcing text to not work. I say this while recording on what should be my break day. So I feel you, Tex. I really do.
So, without further ado, fill your glass and dim the lights, and we shall begin. To frame the history of what would eventually become the clans, we will need to go back and cover several key events which directly influenced General Alexander Kerensky's eventual exodus. I strongly feel that every step taken toward and later on the Exodus road plays a part in everything that follows. To accomplish this, we must wind the clock back to February of 2784, and as we had established near the end of the American Civil War lecture series, it was a dark time, full of uncertainty and fear. These were the final days of Star League. By February of 2784, the American Civil War was finally over, and Ameris had been dead for nearly 5 years, but the scars of his madness had still not healed. The successor states of the Inner Sphere were again at odds, turning their industries toward war, with the devastated hegemony in many other former Star League territories soon going to whoever laid claim to them first.
Yeah, a lot of these succession wars are a big part of the reason why the Inner Sphere kind of gets mired in um, technological stagnation and even regression. Comstar definitely doesn't help either, but you know.
The SLDF at this point was a bare remnant of its once former glory, and any notion of the pre-war Leviathan force was now consigned to a fate unknown. They had campaigned long and hard to rid the Inner Sphere of perhaps the worst tyrant he had seen, and through sheer determination and heroic sacrifice, they had achieved that aim at enormous cost. But peace would not last. The war had established a dangerous precedent for the history of the Inner Sphere, in that Ameris' actions had not only killed Richard Cameron, but the very notion of Star League. A usurper had cut the head off of not only a dynasty but an ideology. Ameris had proved that a House Lord could, with sufficient preparation, resources, and guile, establish primacy over the Inner Sphere with a single masterstroke of
I think it's also the logic of, at this point, the Star League, even before Amaris, honestly, already was kind of in a precarious spot in a lot of ways. Something that's not mentioned here, but probably is mentioned in a different video, is that the other houses, Kurita, Davion, etc., were incredibly powerful in their own right. And while obviously they weren't nations like they are later on, that amount of power in any one person's hands is just a bad idea. You know, like, if you give like half the galaxy to one person, they're gonna get a bit stabby.
diabolical genius. Star League was at this point reduced to the bare remnants of the damaged hegemony, the SLDF, and whatever the House Lords had not claimed for themselves immediately following Ameris' demise. Without the stabilizing presence of the First Lord, and the hegemony's power at the heart of the Inner Sphere much reduced in the wake of the conflict, a dangerous power vacuum had emerged. With no First Lord or royal dynasty to lead the government, the situation seemed increasingly hopeless.
It's also the danger of, like, power vacuum was just mentioned, that needs to be filled, right? And that could come from generals or somebody in the political system or powerful successor states. Like, yeah.
Functional head of the Star League government had been vacated, after all, in this case literally, and no agreed upon means of how to restore the government post-war had yet been.
Okay, I'm sorry. I wasn't ready for the pop effect. God dang it.
There was, after all, no known contingency plan for a scenario this unthinkable. The Cameron dynasty was, for all intents and purposes, removed from the Inner Sphere, and all they had stood for was, at most for now, a distant memory and a dead dream.
This is also why, in real life, you get stuff like designated survivors and the like, where even if all of the cabinet gets destroyed on a given day, for whatever reason, you'll have somebody to take the reins in the short term. Which is rather important, especially when, you know, the cabinet exploded.
That's not to say the powers to be hadn't tried to fix things. For immediately after the Ameris Civil War, the Star League High Council had met to settle outstanding affairs of state and appoint a new First Lord. But through mutual distrust and endless debate on who would inherit the mantle of leadership, they had been unable to reach a lasting decision. And so the great lords of the Inner Sphere, after having been completely unable to agree on the actual issue of succession, pulled away from the negotiations and acted in unison to dissolve the Star League High Council in October of 2780. That is, after stripping General Alexander Kerensky of his titles and authority. For that issue was one of the few major things they had completely agreed upon, that the good general was no longer needed to wear the title of protector. The great lords of the Inner Sphere were in part terrified that the general would, through his legendary leadership and command of the SLDF, take control of Starleague if he were to remain in any position of significant authority.
And to be fair, that's a fair concern, because while I don't think Kerensky would have done that necessarily, it's not impossible that that would have happened, you know? Also, it reminds me of that Fallout line, "You are a hero, and you must leave."
There were also very real concerns that even if they had agreed to appoint a new First Lord, Alexander Kerensky would shape the future for any political dynasty, as he had tried to do with the Camerons. The fact that Alexander Kerensky had brought Amaris to justice was lost on them. The fact that Kerensky had seen the evil in Amaris and acted upon it, that he had tirelessly crusaded to save the Star League from its greatest threat, that he had refused to back down, to give ground or give up through many hellacious campaigns, were all irrelevant considerations from the perspective of the High Council. To them, he was just a general, and to them, generals were easily replaced.
I will say, and I'll play a little bit devil's advocate for the High Lords here. Let's say they did just keep Kerensky on, and they were like, "Yeah, okay, this is fine. You can stick around." He would have had an immense amount of pull in the then crumbling, sure, Star League. Let's say the Star League collapses and Kerensky stays, like near Terra. That's a lot of firepower in humanity on humanity's cradle, basically. I imagine that would have caused quite a lot of issues, honestly. Obviously, not as many issues as in the long run the clans would cause, but to be fair to the High Lords, it's not like anybody could really predict the clans at that point.
As history would have it, General Alexander Kerensky had other plans. After they dismissed Kerensky and his grand notions of rebuilding,
God, his face! I literally get jump scared by it. Just that stare.
Star League, they made one more fateful decision. The great House Lords of the Inner Sphere agreed that Jerome Blake would be appointed to the position of Star League Minister of Communications in order to rebuild the Star League's shattered communications network that they all relied upon. The great houses all needed the HPG network, which had been nearly destroyed during the war, and couldn't trust anyone other than a dedicated neutral party to oversee it. This decision would have far-reaching consequences of its own, but I will get to that lesson in time. And
this is where a lot of the power for Comstar, the Blakists, and so on comes from. And admittedly, while I understand the decision, here I will criticize the High Lords a bit more, because keeping your communications under your own control is kind of important, in my opinion. Like, I know, Comstar became very powerful very quickly, but that's kind of because the High Lords let them, in a way.
After those few decisions on which they could reach consensus, they summarily dissolved the High Council, telling the Inner Sphere via broadcast that future compromise was impossible on the issue of succession. With that done, they then left for their own holdings to prepare for the power struggles to come. To the High Lords, Star League was now dead and buried, and the future of their houses was now firmly in their own hands.
I have to admit, when people say like, oh, this is Game of Thrones in space, this is kind of what I think of, right? These 5 symbols and like the quote-unquote 5 kingdoms of the Inner Sphere, etc. Like, it does really feel that way sometimes.
Privately, the Great Lords had decided for themselves that each of them was the rightful inheritor of Star League, being that there can be only one First Lord. The solution to this disagreement would in time be solved in the standard manner common to the Inner Sphere: total war. Their inability to give ground, to find commonality in these dire times, and their greed and avarice had set the stage for generations of inter-house conflict and served as the direct catalyst to the 4 great succession wars which would follow. But despite being dismissed from his role as protector, General Kerensky still hadn't given up hope. For years, he would
But before we get into Kerensky, really quickly, I just want to mention something. I think one of the strong parts of Battletech is when the writing feels realistic like this. Like, if you do have a position of power like this, of course you're gonna try to expand it. Of course they're gonna try to make their great house the great follow-up on the Cameron dynasty and stuff like that. Of course they are. Like, that's just human. It's so human, and I do like that. I really like that.
exhaustively try and fail to reconvene the Great Lords, spending his time shuttling between the various factions, meeting with them individually in order to bring them together once more, to find any common ground for negotiation and perhaps restart the spark of Star League. He tried to show them that as a people united once more under a single cause, they could potentially provide a new, wonderful age of progress and plenty to their people. Or at the very least, they could recover from the generation of war the Inner Sphere had just crawled out of. Minimally, Kerensky was trying to at least prevent the slow slide into war he felt was coming. Perhaps Kerensky wanted to feel that all he and his men had sacrificed for was not in vain, but his pleas fell on deaf ears.
And to be fair to Kerensky here, I get it, right? Like, you've spent years trying to save the Star League, only for these lords to throw it away. Of course you're mad at them. Of course you hate them. Of course, it makes 100% sense. And yeah, it's kind of a tragedy. It really is.
Inner Sphere nobles being what they are, one by one they had opted to ignore the great general, and when he had finally exhausted every last option for a lasting diplomatic solution, Alexander Kerensky knew what he had to do. Keep in mind that he alone was still at this point provisionally in command of the single largest military the Inner Sphere had, and most of them were still willing to do whatever the hell the great general said was necessary.
It's one of those things where it's the Kaiser kind of logic, right? In a way, Kerensky's own story does mirror Kaiser's to a little bit, you know, crossing the Rubicon, blah blah blah, that sort of thing. Sort of in reverse almost. I don't know how to explain it. But like the army that is loyal to him, not to the Star League, is like a very similar vibe as like End of the Republic, um, you know, Kaiser and Pompey, etc., etc.
Even if it meant going to war once more. And that course of action had indeed been suggested, for General Aaron D. Chevalier, Alexander Kerensky's right-hand man and trusted confidant, had forwarded the thought that maybe the SLDF should solve the problems of the Inner Sphere by doing away with these petty nobles and their political aspirations once and for all. De Chevalier told Kerensky that the troops stood ready to follow him to the gates of hell if need be. The plan would have been, presumably, to use the full might of the SLDF to swiftly neutralize the fighting strength of the great houses, to keep peace in the interim, and then restart Star League from the ground up without the issue of shit-tier nobility ruining everything.
That's a nice plan in theory, but let's be honest, that would have caused a massive galactic-wide civil war. And sure, Star League, the SLDF, could kick any given force's butts at this point still, right? However, that's still a lot of territory to secure, and guerrilla warfare is a thing, and just in general, it would be very bloody, I feel like.
And to that proposal, being offered the opportunity to use the SLDF against the Inner Sphere to provisionally save it, to take charge and hold power over the entire Inner Sphere as a guiding hand. Kerensky had said no. I think it shows extraordinary character and mindfulness that after all he'd suffered, he was unwilling to become a tyrant to fix the situation. After all, to replace a tyrant with a tyrant would only serve as a terrible precedent for future generations. And so...
Yeah, and honestly, good on Kerensky for this. Like, fair is fair. I think he made the right decision here.
On 14th February 2784, General Kerensky briefed the assembled officer corps of the SLDF in an empty warehouse on Terra. It was by design a secret meeting, and wisely so, for what the general proposed would be seen as nothing short of treasonous against the Starleague government. That is, if you could still consider Starleague an actual government at that point. All of his other options exhausted or unthinkable, he fully intended to take the SLDF beyond the reach of any of the great houses and their territorial aspirations. He wanted to spare the men and women of the SLDF from having to play a part in the next great war, to spare the citizens of the Inner Sphere from the ruinous firepower of the Starleague Defense Force, and perhaps in the process, force the great lords of the Inner Sphere to rethink what they were planning on doing.
And honestly, it's not a bad idea, right? Taking away... It's kind of like... I guess it's kind of like taking a kid's toys away. You've been bad. I'm taking your toys away. You're not playing with them. And sure, the great houses have their own technological bases, to some extent, and they have their own forces, etc. But it's definitely a lot less destructive than what the SLDF still had.
General Alexander Kerensky felt it was his solemn duty and the duty of his officers to take the SLDF completely out of the equation. And while many felt the Exodus plan as presented was the most ethical, moral, and dutiful choice remaining to them at this point in time, some officers felt their duty was to stay and defend at least a portion of what they'd fought so long for. There was no dispute that the time to decide was now upon them, for the coming storm was obvious to those officers present at this final meeting of the assembled SLDF. The great houses had already made private and public overtures to recruit from their forces to bolster growing house armies. To his credit, General Alexander Kerensky allowed the soldiers of the SLDF to make up their own choices regarding their future, for he could not in good faith force them to obey. After all they had suffered, and the high cost of their victory over Amaris, he felt it best for each officer and each soldier to choose for themselves what course they would follow. And the choices at this point were rather grim. Either stay in the increasingly unstable Inner Sphere to make a future among the ruins, waiting for the war or wars to come, or commit to the Exodus and hope for the best.
It's a tough one, right? Because they won. They did it. They killed Amaris. They did their job. And then they get betrayed, effectively, and forced out of the Inner Sphere. That, or effectively become like rogue units, which will eventually be hunted down. Or at best, maybe. Honestly, I could see some mercenary groups having their origins here in the SLDF. I don't actually know if there are any. Maybe it'll be mentioned. But if there are, if there aren't or already, not a bad origin for a mercenary group with like pretty decent equipment, I would say. Would actually make for kind of a neat little background.
And when the votes were finally tallied, fully 80% of the assembled forces opted to follow Kerensky's plan and leave. For those opting to join the Exodus operation, the choice to follow the general was perceived as wiser than throwing their future plans in with any of the great houses. After all, they joined the SLDF to serve Starleague as a whole, not the territorial ambitions of any particular house.
Honestly, good on them.
Even if Starleague was now a mere idea supported by the crumbling infrastructure of the mauled hegemony, much of the SLDF felt that continuing to serve its ideology was a far better option and potentially a more noble choice than serving as cannon fodder in the wars to come.
Really quickly, I just want to mention this. I think the choices of art and music are very strong here. It's very simple. It's just a little bit of piano and, you know, just showing the events as they are. But it works really well with Tex's narration. So, like, good on that. Good on that.
It is also worth noting the cost of the Ameris Civil War. The men and women of the SLDF carried it with them. The war had made an indelible mark upon them all. War has a cruel way of stripping the civilization from a soldier, and piece by piece many of them were reduced to feeling they had nothing left but the uniform they wore. Returning to civilization for many was an unwelcome culture shock. The greatest casualty of the Ameris Civil War inflicted on the SLDF was perhaps being ultimately reminded of the civilized versions of their past selves. Staying in uniform provided them with a necessary sense of identity and belonging that they desperately needed after all they'd suffered, as many of them now knew no home but the SLDF.
Shawshank Redemption goes into this as well, like institutionalization, right? In that case, it's in prison, but, you know, military can do that just as much. And in general, it is kind of scary in a way, because that institutionalizing is so... it's insidious. Because you go back and you realize you have no home anymore. You thought you did, but you don't. And that's... it's tragic. It really is.
No family but their fellow comrades in arms, their brother or sister in uniform. It is no wonder that many saw the Exodus as the best option they had. Most of them had nothing left to lose at this point, but not all would choose to see it this way. Some would refuse to leave and opt to stay in the Inner Sphere on their own terms. Of the SLDF 12th Corps, the 151st Royal Battlemech Division, the infamous Ulysses S. Grant Division itself, had opted to stay under the outspoken commander Lauren Hayes, who was, from the very start, a hard critic to the idea of picking up and leaving. And Major General Lauren Hayes had her reasons.
The Ulysses S. Grant Division is very fun. I like that. I wonder what other divisions there are. Like... is there like a Nobunaga one? That would be neat.
She possessed extraordinary conviction in her beliefs. She was a Star League Major General and had assumed division command after seeing her commanding officer cut down in the brutal Canopus campaign. During the conflict, she led from the front and a battle master, taking to the field through Operations Chieftain and the final liberation of Terra. Seriously wounded in combat and losing a hand from a direct hit to the cockpit, she never gave up field command and was only fitted with a prosthetic once Ameris was dead and his empire a smoking crater.
Oh my god, she is awesome. What? How have I never heard of her before? Yo! What? Instant fangirl. Oh my god.
She was an idealist who
Yeah.
saw abandoning their duties and to flee the increasingly unstable political situation as the death knell of the Inner Sphere and a betrayal of everything Star League stood for. Despite their differences of opinion, however, Kerensky saw in her a glimmer of promise, and in her idealism a semblance of hope for any who opted to stay behind. Hoping in part to preserve a part of Star League in the Inner Sphere, a deal was brokered, a compromise of sorts between General Kerensky, General Hayes, and Jerome Blake. Those under her command who wanted to stay would join the last vestiges of the Star League government. Jerome Blake was the newly appointed, and as history would have it, final communications director of SL Comnet, and he had immediate need of significant forces to defend his holdings.
Is this where Comstar? Oh my god. No. I didn't know this. Oh frick. Also, god, I mentioned it earlier, but Blake's like eyes. They brought him to life in a very strong way because, good lord, the guy is unsettling.
And so Alexander Kerensky bartered the loyalty of the 151st Royal Battlemech Division to Jerome Blake to become the military arm of SL Comnet, soon to be Comstar, who would
Frick, I did not know this. That's crazy.
in turn keep a small piece of Starleague alive in the heart of the inner sphere, if secretly. I believe the hope at this time was that if Blake's network could maintain communications and information flowing, the barest civility of Starleague could potentially endure. Perhaps the promise of a brighter future could in time follow. However, with the value of the HBG network being what it is, Blake knew he would need a mailed fist to hammer at anyone seeking to impede the free flow of communications, data, and information. Further, this agreement between the SLDF and Comstar served another purpose. Blake could keep everything on the sly until the Exodus fleet had left, and then cover it up from there. I realize I did cover this briefly during the end of the American Civil War lecture series, but the reason I bring this up again is that this small and mostly forgotten act, the seeding of what would become Comstar with vastly powerful forces, is something that lets us see into Kerensky's mindset. By setting up small parts of the Star League and the SLDFs to survive at the heart of the inner sphere, in secret to protect the last vestiges of government, speaks to me that he hoped that maybe, someday, perhaps in a better future, he or his forces may in some way return to restore the former glory of Star League.
I think it's also very interesting that, tiny spoilers, but eventually Tukayid is Comstar versus the clans, right? In a lot of ways. It's not just Comstar, but yeah. In a way, it's just an extrapolation of the like an SLDF civil war, effectively. Also, do we get more about oh, I forget her name. What was her name? Hold on.
The conflict she led from the front.
Hold on. What was her name?
Major General, and had assumed fiction in her beliefs. She was a Star League major.
Okay, what's her name though?
Of the SLDFs to leave at this point, but not all would choose to see it this way. Some would refuse to leave and opt to stay in the inner sphere on their own terms. Of the SLDF 12th Corps, the 151st Royal Battle Mech Division, the infamous Ulysses S. Grant Division itself, had opted to stay under the outspoken commander Lauren Hayes, who was
Lauren Hayes. Okay, I'm gonna try to remember that name because I am very interested in her because she sounds awesome and I want to know more about her.
Future, he or his forces may in some way return to restore the former glory of Star League. I believe it speaks to the merits of Kerensky's character that while extensive preparations were made to leave the crumbling inner sphere behind, he was also prepared for a way home when the time was right. He would tragically never live to see the end result of his romantic optimism, or how by giving Comstar elite military forces he would inadvertently be shaping the future in ways he could never fathom.
Yeah, and it's also interesting to see, you know, he is a bit of an idealist, obviously, and like he goes, okay, the Exodus happens, but we'll still try and make the like what we leave behind good. And I do respect that, I admit. On the other hand, there's definitely an argument to be made that he could have taken a third path, I think. He could have taken a third path of not taking exile, not just staying, but basically kind of forcing everyone to the negotiating table again. Not necessarily taking control himself, but kind of standing with a gun in the room and going, okay, you guys are going to hammer this out, or you're all getting blabbed. And at that point, we'll figure it out. I know that leans more towards the tyrant angle, but I don't know. It's an option I think that hadn't been considered in this moment, and maybe it would have been a better one. It's difficult to say because obviously we know what happens after this. We don't know what would have happened after my proposal. Probably nothing good, let's be honest.
Departure of the 151st Royal Battle Mech Division and those who sided with General Hayes was the first major fracturing of Kerensky's command.
Hmm.
The second would come shortly thereafter. Some people decided to stay because they'd had their share of time in uniform and wanted a piece of the action for themselves. Realizing the economy of the Inner Sphere was gearing up for the mother of all wars, they opted to put their long-honed battlefield skills on the open market.
Mercenaries! Hey, this is what I was talking about earlier. It is a good origin story, honestly.
Several pieces of the SLDF knew full well that the Inner Sphere's chief product was war, and that the Great Lords needed little, if any reason, to slug it out. And so these people realized that their unique skill sets, hard won on the battlefield, could provisionally make them exceptionally wealthy. Numerous mercenary units formed from the various combat commands of the SLDF who had opted to not partake in the Exodus, among them the infamous Eridani Light Horse, the 4th Palisade Rangers, and the Screaming Eagles.
I didn't actually know the Eridani Light Horse originates in SLDF. That's kind of neat. I didn't know that.
Many of these units and others would serve with the utmost distinction until meeting the SLDF again. But I do promise to cover more of their ultimate fate in time. Of the monolithic Hobbesian Leviathan that was its pre-war strength, only 113 divisions of the SLDF remained post-Ameris Civil War. And of those, over 100 divisions had opted to follow General Alexander Kerensky away from the coming conflagration. From available records, surviving from this time, I can say with some certainty the breakdown is as follows: 32 battle mech divisions, 76 infantry divisions, and 63 independent regiments, combat commands, irregulars, and volunteers. This is a force of almost...
Oh dang, there's some pirates in there. Oh, the Amarians. Yeah, okay, that makes sense. Amaricians? Would it be Amarians or Amaricians? Or maybe something else?
6 million men and women, plus their equipment. 1/3 of those personnel were regular frontline soldiers, with the rest now being their support staff, scientists, loyalist Starleague bureaucrats, plus other remnants of the now dissolved Starleague government. Once finally ready and assembled in their staging areas, the fleet itself was 1,392 jump ships, escorted by an armada of 402 warships. Between them, they had a total drop capacity of 5,000 first-rate dropships. Even diminished as they were from pre-war strength, this fleet was the single largest concentration of force currently present in the Inner Sphere. Large as this force was, moving through the increasingly contested Inner Sphere took enormous care, and would have been fundamentally impossible without the full compliance of what would become Comstar. Still, the great houses of the Inner Sphere understandably grew nervous when Kerensky's massive fleet arrived in system.
Yeah, I can't exactly blame them for getting nervous when a giant, fleet shows up, you know? I feel like that's like you're playing Stellaris or whatever, and suddenly, 5 million fleet strength in your territory. It's like, okay, you might not be doing anything, but you might be planning something.
Despite the persistent communications difficulties on the still damaged HPG network, the sporadic rumors of Kerensky's massive fleet moving through the Inner Sphere persisted. When signaled directly or asked what his intentions were, General Kerensky would respond the fleet was on extended maneuvers, an excuse most decided to believe, because they couldn't do a goddamn thing about it.
Yeah, exactly.
On the 8th of July, the Exodus order was given, and the fleets jumped.
Also, I think, in general, I do personally like the idea that slowly but surely, some of this fleet did kind of piece off a little bit. Not all of it, obviously. Most of it would stay. But yeah, also very Battlestar Galactica. This is so Battlestar Galactica.
They made their way through the territory of the Draconis Combine, headed straight for the periphery. Along the way, any SLDF holding, base, warehouse, or shipyard they encountered would strip completely of useful resources before moving on. From New Samarkand, the fleet assembled again, and Kerensky made a last choice before leaving the Inner Sphere forever. he followed the suggestion of one of his rank-and-file soldiers and donated the remains of Stefan Amaris to the new Samarkand Medical School. His corpse would serve as a training tool for aspiring doctors who wanted to see what the insides of a tyrant looked like. On November the 5th, the fleet began
That's dark, but understandable. Also, this is very cool art.
leaving the system. The last ship to jump out was Kerensky's own flagship, the McKenna's Pride, itself now an ancient relic of Star League. As far as Inner Sphere historical records allow, the fleet was last spotted over Gutara 5, and shortly thereafter, they faded into memory. That is to say, from Inner Sphere historical records, they ceased to exist for the most part, but some would always wonder where they had gone. The great houses, upon realizing that the excuse of extended maneuvers were in fact nothing of the sort, were furious Kerensky had left. But they now had their own problems. They were already in the planning stages for what would become the First Succession War. As such, they had more immediate concerns than the weapons, advanced technology, and warriors now outside their reach. And with that simple consideration, the Inner Sphere turned its gaze inward, with each successor state now eyeing the other as potential territorial acquisitions. As an ancient Terran philosopher has said, war is nothing more than a continuation of politics by other means.
True.
What would follow would certainly be that, and more.
Clausewitz was an interesting guy, by the way. Definitely worth reading up on if you're ever interested in some history. Also, Roffelstein construction!
Soon enough, there would be a war, the likes of which no one had ever seen, and 3 more after that, to prove, in my humble opinion, one thing. In all likelihood, Alexander Kerensky was probably the last greatest hope the Inner Sphere ever had of a lasting, if not permanent, peace. And now that he had gone, it would soon begin to finally fall apart. But the story of the SLDF doesn't end there. The end of the SLDF starts where the map to civilization ends, the deep periphery. We're going to have to talk about the Exodus Road.
Part 2. Oh boy, we're half an hour in. This is a long video.
Throughout history, there has always been the edge of the map, the frontier, that place where all knowledge of what may lay beyond being the providence of rumor, superstition, and fear. During the early age of sail on ancient Terra, mankind, not knowing what perils lay beyond the edge of the known world, would draw great beasts there and say, "Here be dragons." To cross into the unknown, and what lay beyond has always been the providence of the crazy or desperate or those without other options.
Fun fact, it's not really related to the video, but something I was just reminded of. In Age of Empires 2, there's actually a mission where you, as the Vikings, have to go to North America and like build stuff there. It's pretty neat. It's a fun little mission. You have to like colonize Greenland and such. Funnily enough, in the middle of the map is like a massive dragon painted on the water, and if you go there, you sink. Your ships just die straight up.
And fate had made General Alexander Kerensky precisely that sort of man. And so, the enormous Exodus fleet made careful progress into unknown territory. The deep periphery was at best partially charted space. Long ago, the Inner Sphere had stopped putting big money into programs of deep space exploration, instead opting to improve the holdings they had or fight over them. It is believed that General Alexander Kerensky only had a vague notion as to their eventual destination. Before departing, in preparation, he downloaded the total sum of data from the defunct Star League Astrological Mapping Corps, copying every last chart and map file, and then destroyed the originals. He wanted to ensure none could follow them. But deep beyond the periphery was truly the unknown. And as such, any progress through this poorly charted and mostly unknown region of space came slowly, as scouts had to find an optimal path for the fleet, and then report back that it was truly safe. Alexander Kerensky was thorough in coordinating the massive fleet, driving scouts forward to find a path while directing warships and scouting jump ships to make up a substantial rear guard to ensure they weren't being tailed or followed.
Once again, very Battlestar Galactica, I find. I think it's, I think it's interesting to see, like, the inspiration there. Because I feel like there's definitely some inspiration, at the very least. I believe the original Battlestar Galactica came out around, what, like the 50s? Maybe the 60s. I could be misremembering. But yeah, it definitely has that vibe. Also, it kind of looks like there's eyes on the left there, right above the fighter. Kind of spooky.
Random course corrections were routinely ordered to prevent any forces following their wake from guessing their final destination. Even garbage from the fleet was ejected jumps away from their actual course to prevent being tracked by what they left behind. If any vessel of this era ever did choose to try and follow the Exodus fleet, none ever reported back. But the Inner Sphere also had its hands full at this point, for General Kerensky's great concerns were sadly becoming prophetic.
Now I'm imagining an origin story for a deep periphery nation where, like, a tiny fleet tried to follow the Exodus fleet, or maybe got split off or something, and had to form, like, a small nation out there in the deep periphery. Right in the clan's path as well, by the way, which, oh boy.
As a necessary side note, I must mention that the First Succession War, starting in 2786, utilized the full arsenals of the Great Houses and turned into a 34-year-long nightmare, which claimed human lives by the billions. It is accordingly no great surprise that the forces of the Great Houses, while tremendously upset at the exodus of the SLDF, dedicated few if any resources in trying to follow them. They had their own fucking problems by the megaton. But I guess that's what happens when you throw the rules of warfare out the window and decide to settle things with every weapon you've got. The total disregard for human life and reckless lack of constraint in the conduct of the First Succession War would result in the technological base of the Inner Sphere degrading significantly.
Yeah, and while I did defend the High Lords a little bit in their decision making before, I will not defend this. I think the loss of life here is unconscionable, quite frankly. The industrial base part often gets focused on, but quite frankly, nuking a factory also means nuking the city near that factory and all the people in it. And yeah, that's pretty evil. That's pretty evil. That's just how it is.
Through their violent excess, they erased many centuries of progress and a few short decades of intense warfare. In the history of the Inner Sphere, violence was never the answer. Violence is a question, and the answer is inevitably yes, as the Inner Sphere began to slide into eventual war.
Sorry, I just like the idea that it's just violence? Yes!
The Exodus fleet had its own significant trouble. Despite careful preparation and well-trained crews, many ships were tragically lost through misjump or catastrophic drive failure. Time and again, vessels would wait at the jump point for ships that failed to ever materialize. One by one, the vessels of the Great Fleet were being whittled away by what amounted to error and malfunction. Many of the ships in the SLDF were by now ancient, battle-scarred vessels held together far beyond their design lifespan, with scavenged parts and jury-rig repairs. As a noteworthy example, the McKenna warship class, once the pride of the SLDF Navy, was well over 130 years old as a design. And after the hard operations tempo of the Ameris Civil War, multiple refits, and hasty wartime repairs, it was no wonder these vessels were beginning to show their age.
Yeah, and again, very Battlestar Galactica, right? The sort of this ancient tech starting to fail on you slowly but surely must be scary. And honestly, I would love to see some stories. I'm sure they're out there. I'd love to see some stories about those that would have become clanners instead settling along the route of the Exodus. Um, like people forced to stay in a system because their jump drive malfunctioned. And you can't exactly go to the next system without a jump drive, so what you gonna do?
Shortages in supplies and necessary materials resulted in stringent rationing and a universally low standard of living among the forces of the Exodus fleet, but morale was initially quite high. Most believed in General Alexander Kerensky enough to risk death for decades up to this point, so the
Yeah.
perils of the unknown were just yet another challenge to overcome. However, as fate would have it, this road would be longer than they had ever expected, and after a few months of jumping into the unknown, and now with the inner sphere far, far behind them, some began to express significant doubt. Tensions grew slowly at first between the crews, between the civilians and the military. Some began to consider that the inner sphere was far from perfect, but it was at least civilization, and out here was anything but. With every jump they pressed on, the SLDF began to crack from these stresses, as more and more of the fleet wondered if leaving everything behind was really the best choice they could have made. Some, in the quiet darkness of space, and now with endless time to ponder the situation, wondered if they'd left for the wrong reasons. And so the seeds of doubt were planted deep in the fleet. Kerensky
Yeah, that's dangerous. I imagine, in general, you need some kind of unifying thing to keep you going, right? And that's where the clans are gonna come from, I imagine.
did what he could to hold them together, to remind them of their purpose. But for many, this journey was becoming a lengthy nightmare, a nightmare spent in cramped ship corridors with no news from home, or where they were headed, as one by one ships around them disappeared due to accident. The discomfort of severely cramped living and working conditions, the relatively few amenities, strict rationing, and the feeling of coming to terms with the choice they had made was continually weighing on the minds of the Exodus fleet.
It's also one of those things, for example, in submarines in real life. It's one of the few places in the American Navy, for example, you can still get deep fried food. And the reason is simple. You live in an absolute tiny tube for up to like a year or more even. Of course you need something to keep you going. And a warm, nice, tasty meal. Yeah, that's a big part of that, honestly. That's a very big part of that. So take that away and leave no end in sight. And what do you really have at that point? People need hope. People need light at the end of the tunnel.
Random course corrections ordered by Kerensky to deter pursuit, ships being detached to go dump garbage far away from the route they intended to take, and similar extensive measures in covering their tracks continued to ensure a very slow pace of progress. While these measures were incredibly successful in covering their tracks, as even Comstar's intelligence service would find years later, these very precautions to safeguard their journey would result in such a slow pace of progress as to further add to the general worry that the Exodus was a faltering exercise in futility, not a planned military operation. Many began to fear that they were merely floating around in the periphery until they all died, got lost, or starved. Some began to believe this was a trip to nowhere, a living purgatory spent between old bulkheads, worse company, and rapidly deteriorating morale. Alexander Kerensky did his best to lead people through the Exodus, shuttling between ships at every jump, taking time to explain why it was a far better choice to leave than pound the great house lords of the inner sphere into submission. He took time to listen, to patiently hear their concerns, and showed extraordinary resolve in maintaining morale as best he could. But in the end, he was only one man.
I also think, admittedly, I'm going to be more critical of Kerensky. Sorry. I think within the fleet, you need to give people hope. And that's something that you're not doing, Kerensky. And that's something that's kind of a crucial part of a crucial flaw in the leadership, in my opinion. And also, obviously he couldn't see this, but having left, the inner sphere became absolute barbarism, quite frankly. So I don't know. Well, I don't think the Exodus is necessarily a bad choice. I also don't think it was a good one, quite frankly. And the way he's conducting it, well, it's idealistic, I think is the word I'm trying to find. It's overly idealistic because I can appreciate wanting to I can appreciate wanting to cover your tracks. It's important. I get it. I can appreciate, like, keeping the SLDF's forces out of the inevitable conflict. I can appreciate that. I really can. However, there are better ways to do the Exodus, I feel like. I don't know. I'm trying to find my specific thoughts on this, and I'm a little bit more critical of Kerensky, I guess. Maybe unfairly so, but yeah.
While Alexander Kerensky knew how difficult it was to hold people together through the uncertainty and chaos of a long war, he found it all that much harder to hold them together through peace, especially when all there is to do is wait and see what the next jump brings.
Exactly, you need a goal, and with Amaris, you have a goal.
This wasn't helped by the general's own family fucking things up. At the start of the Exodus, General Alexander Kerensky revealed he had a family. He'd been married for nearly 2 decades by the start of the Exodus, but had kept that fact hidden save for a few trustworthy souls. The years leading up to the American Civil War and the time following it had been chaotic. To protect his family from reprisal, he had kept their place in the inner sphere a necessary secret. His wife and his 2 sons had been in Moscow during the Ameris occupation, and their anonymity had most certainly assured their survival.
Honestly, very fair, because yeah, otherwise they would have probably died.
Trapped on Terra during the war, Katyusha had bravely resisted Amaris's occupation, committed herself to sabotaging the regime at every chance she had while bitterly fighting for her family's survival. She was tough as nails, was nearly captured on a handful of occasions, and even shot twice. Throughout, she maintained a spirit of defiance and resolved for her family's sake to
Good for her.
never give up. But while Alexander Kerensky's wife Katyusha was a bedrock of emotional and moral support, his sons were a colossal pain in his ass. I have, to this point, been largely unbiased. But when it comes to the general's sons, I can't guarantee to hold my tongue. They are
Okay, let's see.
responsible for their actions and everything that followed. You have been warned. In some history circles, it is often suggested that any competent ruler or leader will be eclipsed by the sheer incompetence, stupidity, or madness of their heirs or offspring. Some historians have even chosen to mark this problem as an unavoidable progression of any dedicated ruling class, wherein a great unifying ruler will pass the reins onto the less capable and far less competent heirs, and so that in a few generations any dynasty will undermine its own foundation.
Don't worry, guys. Amaris is totally cool. Richard Cameron, last First Lord of the Star League. Stefan Amaris, Customer of the Month at Golden Corral.
And result in total ruin. So I suppose this is where I introduce Nicholas and Andrei Kerensky.
All right.
Yes, I know in agreed upon sources it's put as Andrei, but I'm not going to say that, because my brain will autocorrect it every time, and while I would like to label Nicholas and Andrei as the goofus and gallant of the Kerensky lineage, the comparison would be tragically incorrect. Also, I think the clanners in the audience would bachelor me the moment I stopped talking in order to claim me a bondsman in order to tell them bedtime stories until I perish.
Okay, I love this. I love this so much. It is. The elemental with a plushie is actually kind of adorable, and now I kind of want my own plushie. Hold on.
So in the interests of a
She get.
temporary peace, I think I'd rather label them as what they were. Flawed men in the shadow of a truly great one. Nicholas Kerensky was the elder son of General Kerensky and of near zero historical significance at this point in his life. Not saying he was crap, but comparing him to his father is like comparing raisins to wine. Same ingredients, but far different outcomes. As a person, Nicholas Kerensky was known principally for being exceptionally manipulative.
Really quickly, before we continue getting into Nicholas, that is a really tough position to be in, by the way, as well. Like, in the shadow of your father or mother or whomever, right? That sort of place tends to breed contempt, to say the least. And I wonder if that's part of the reason why people become less competent in the second generation. so to speak.
Especially where his own legacy was later concerned. Clan records revere him as being a near saint, but he had a major hand in writing his own legacy. Further, I suspect that his creative historical revisionism was exercised to enhance his standing, associate his legacy with the great accomplishments of his father, all the while downplaying his many, many faults.
Fair, and I'm not about to defend Nicholas here, but this is true for a lot of figures throughout history. I mentioned Kaiser earlier. Most of what we know of Kaiser comes from him, right? Same thing with like a lot of Roman emperors and like a lot of the surviving stuff is propaganda. Same thing with pharaohs. Pharaohs would often try to take credit for their forebears' stuff, etc., for their forebears' accomplishments, etc. And even today, that still happens. So, while I'm not going to defend it, I do understand it.
I feel that Nicholas Kerensky feared that history would realize he was nothing more than the troubled son of a great man, desperately trying to hold on to the significance of his legacy and through that ensure his own place in the spotlight. What I can say with any certainty is that he was only 2 when the American Civil War started, and only 16 when it ended, so any reports of him having played a significant role in the conflict are probably horse shit. However,
Yeah, that makes sense. At most, he probably would have been like... At most, he probably would have helped his father or mother with some small thing here or there during the Civil War. Because, 16... It's not really old enough to, like, go to war, I hope. But it's old enough to help out here and there.
records of his deeds from this time period are hard to find, as those who survived the American occupation of Terra seldom spoke of the atrocities they endured.
Tracks.
I believe this made a mark on him he would carry his entire life. He was a brash and headstrong man with a propensity to try to get his own way regardless of the consequences. As far as I am able to find, he trended towards sociopathic behavior with deep-seated emotional issues no doubt stemming from the horrors of the American Civil War.
It is actually kind of an interesting idea that this person is bad because of PTSD, effectively. Which I think Nicholas being like a bad kind of PTSD-addled sociopath is interesting, at the very least.
But more on that in a bit. Andrei Kerensky was Nicholas's brother and was the younger son of Katyusha and Alexander Kerensky. He was born on Terra but spent most of his childhood trying to survive in the shadow of Maris's security forces. By his adolescent years, he was fighting alongside local resistance forces from their Moscow base. I believe that he was, above all, quite humble and content to play whatever role history assigned to him. He was also
good on him.
So a bit naive and trusting in the extreme, especially where his fellow SLDF personnel were concerned, and doubly so for his family. And it was through this trust he was directly manipulated by his brother Nicholas into encouraging the dissidents in the fleet to act on their desperate dissatisfaction. Did I mention Nicholas Kerensky was a manipulative sociopath? And we know how that typically plays out, right? What is known for certain is that Nicholas Kerensky used his brother...
I kind of really like the idea that Kerensky himself constantly has to deal with this temptation of tyranny. And while he resists it, his son, Nicholas, does not. And that is so good. That's so good. It's so interesting. I really like that.
Andrei to encourage those among the fleet who thought the exodus was a mistake into what would become an open mutiny. Why he did this is a bit harder to pin down, as the records of the event are probably revised by Nicholas himself and naturally paint this as the weakness of the men and women in question, not his own manipulation. Perhaps Nicholas felt it was time to take charge away from his aging father. Perhaps Nicholas felt it was now his destiny to lead the Exodus fleet to the Promised Land, as his father had led them through the war. Perhaps he was tired of not being the center of attention and wanted his moment in the sun to steer his own destiny for once. Perhaps Nicholas wanted to do away with these non-believers and call the fleet of the weak personnel lacking the necessary faith to proceed. I feel that Nicholas was fundamentally damaged and didn't know how trust worked. What is known is he pushed his younger brother into speaking with the disaffected officers and crews wanting to end the Exodus.
Before we continue, really quickly, I do want to mention, honestly, to me, my interpretation here is Nicholas is already a damaged person, as is mentioned. Maybe the pressures of the Exodus kind of got to him, and this is his way of acting out to rebel, like a teenager in a way. This is something we often see with younger children that have to deal with trauma very early on, you know, death, decay, war, all those kind of things, that they end up not really growing up. And combine that with sociopathic tendencies, and you get a very, very, very volatile cocktail, which I'm not going to defend, but I do find very interesting. And it makes me wonder if, in a different situation, Nicholas might have been a genuinely good successor to the original Kerensky.
And as such, I feel it is entirely fair to put the responsibility of what followed on him. After 14 long months of slowly jumping,
I'm gonna say it's on both the brothers a little bit. While yes, Nicholas manipulated his younger brother. His younger brother is still his own person and can still make his own decisions as well. So that is still partially on the younger brother to some degree.
deeper and deeper into unknown space, and with devious manipulation on behalf of Nicholas Kerensky, morale collapsed to a breaking point. It was in August of 2785 that things came to a head. Many were now openly concerned that the great general had zero plans other than keeping the fleet moving forward at any cost, one jump at a time. By this time, through urging by Andrei Kerensky on the orders and influence of his brother Nicholas, enough officers had decided mutiny was the best remaining course of action, and perhaps emboldened by the support of Alexander Kerensky's progeny, they acted. And the repercussions of the decision would prove remarkable. The Prince Eugen, a Texas-class battleship, openly broke from the fleet, announcing.
So I think this does go back a little bit to Alexander Kerensky not actually giving them any hope. If you give them some hope, that makes the mutiny much more difficult to organize, at the very least.
A plan to return to the inner sphere and whatever fate awaited them. They would not take a single jump further, nor would they obey any orders to return to the fleet. They were leaving on their own terms back to the inner sphere by the most direct course available. If this had been one of the multitude of scout vessels or light warships, none would have likely taken notice. This whole incident may have been chalked up to a misjump if they had chosen to simply disappear, but the Prince Eugen was a Texas-class battleship, one of 52 built pre-Ameris coup, and was now one of only 7 in existence. It was a significant vessel to break from the fleet, and perhaps due to her imposing status in the order of battle, she was joined by a small flotilla who had no intention of continuing the Exodus any step further. In total, 8 other vessels followed suit in open mutiny. This mutiny's leader was Admiral Votak, who conspired with General Wilbur Brasso of SLDF Ground Command, among many other notable officers. These weren't simply green men shaky at the notion of deep space, but long-standing veterans who'd finally lost faith in what they thought was now a doomed endeavor. Their crews threw in with them because they too had suffered long campaigns and didn't want to die lost in space to what was now to them a thoroughly lost cause.
And honestly, I can't blame them. I really can't. It's a very understandable way to go. And I will say, in general, I love how understandable most of these things are so far. Just very, very human. Sorry, I feel like I keep saying it, but it's something I appreciate in writing, I guess, because it can be very easy to just be like, well, this character is now stupid, and then they do something dumb, you know? But no, they are smart in their own way, just with flaws and mistakes and humanity. I like that.
General Alexander Kerensky wasn't going to allow the fleet to fracture, and so he acted immediately to end this threat. Rather than rush into a fight, taking it ship versus ship and risking damage to vessels he could not replace or properly repair, or worse, risk civilians being massacred in the crossfire, Kerensky made a calculated choice. Kerensky called in the one group he knew could get the job done right. He called on what remained of the best, the goddamn Black Watch. Kerensky called Major Elizabeth Hazen of the Black Watch to his side and gave her
I love that the bagpipes are going.
orders to bring the ships back into the fold, to stop the mutiny and restore good order by bringing the mutineers to immediate military justice, to face off against the entirety of a mutinous warship flotilla, to combat its crews, marines, and support staff. Hazen took only a force of 160 Black Watch Marines. The crew of the Prince Eugen probably knew they screwed up the moment the drop pods hammered into its hull. Still, they had a distinct advantage in numerical superiority, years of training, and total familiarity with the vessels they'd operated through a long war. The Black Watch, however, had batshit crazy on their side.
I gotta love some crazy Scotsman.
By this point, the battle-hardened veterans of the Black Watch were people who'd seen enough nukes to find them frankly fucking boring. So a zero-G space battle boarding action was a walk in the fucking park. With zero fucks given, with no mercy on offer, the Black Watch boarded the Prince Eugen, kicked the doors in, and proceeded to ventilate all opposition. They hammered through the corridors like the fist of an angry god. In record time, the Black Watch secured the vessel with ruthless efficiency, scouring the corridors of any resistance. After a furious firefight, the admiral in charge lay dead, and the ringleaders of the mutiny were captured relatively unharmed.
It does make me wonder, like, surely being out there in space for such a long time, they weren't fighting constantly, right? I'm sure they were training all the time, but I do wonder how many of those skills did atrophy getting out there, you know?
The 8 other ships surrendered without a fucking shot, surrendering outright, absolutely terrified of the Black Watch and General Kerensky's wrath. Major Elizabeth Hazen dragged the surviving mutineers to a military court-martial held at the jump point out of system. The sentence was brutal. After all was said and done, all excuses heard and all defenses noted, every single officer at or above the rank of captain were summarily executed. Major Hazen handed down the orders herself, and General Kerensky made his son Andrei take part in the firing squad because of the key part he played in encouraging the dissenters.
God dang.
Feel that this was a tad unfair. As previously stated, Nicholas Kerensky had convinced Andrei to speak with the mutineers before they had acted, and employed to effect changes on the Exodus in order to perhaps steer it or take charge and play hero or prove to his father that he too was a great man. Nicholas Kerensky had then opted to stay in the shadows, content to watch things play out regardless of the consequences, and Andrei could have told everyone of Nicholas's part, of Nicholas Kerensky's meddling and plotting and manipulation, but he kept silent and refused to say an ill word about his brother's doing and took his punishment like a man.
I have to admit, in a weird way, while I think Nicholas is not a good guy here, I kind of like him. Kind of like how Liao, I like Liao, you know, like kind of like how I like the Capellans. The Capellans are not good people, right? They're not. But I find them really interesting. And in the same way, Nicholas is not a good person by any means. He is very clearly, like has been mentioned, manipulative, sociopathic, just generally like pretty awful, and like staying in the shadows like a little trickster. But I find that so fascinating. What can I say? I like a little finger.
Nicholas Kerensky, meanwhile, admitted to nothing because above all he was concerned with his own survival at this point.
Mm.
He refused to tell his father what he had done and how he had manipulated his brother and taken advantage of the situation. I find those are the qualifications of a goddamn coward. But
Well, to some degree, yes. You're not wrong. On the other hand, I think it's relatively smart from Nicholas. I don't know. What can I say? I like a trickster.
digress. The fleet took the news of the attempted mutiny and the following reprisals rather hard. This, when compounded with the already negative morale within the Exodus fleet, resulted in an acute crisis of faith. This is because most people in the fleet could, on some level, understand why the mutiny happened. This was all beyond any reasonable time frame they could have ever conceived, as day by day they were jumping further and further off the damn map, deep into the unknown, and when somebody wanted to turn back for what seemed reasonable cause, the effect was brutal reprisal.
I do think also this is a little bit. Kerensky, I think, could have prepped them better. And again, he wanted secrecy. I get it. He didn't want to be followed. I get it. But that causes him to become the tyrant he doesn't want to be, to some degree. Because let's be honest, the Texas wanted to leave. And frankly, for very reasonable reasons. And sure, I understand Alexander's logic here. I do. But they are the actions of a tyrant.
Not to say General Alexander Kerensky had shaky reasoning in this case. After all, any vessel that went back would inevitably give away the SLDF's position, or worse, add their firepower to what was undoubtedly an exceptionally unstable inner sphere.
Yeah, and again, I do not blame his actions here at all, but can absolutely make the argument that by trying to not become a tyrant, he became a tyrant, just over a much smaller kingdom.
Additionally, the breakdown of morale in any fleet jeopardizes its well-being and cohesion. Still, not many shared Alexander Kerensky's convictions. Long journeys into the unknown do strange things to the human soul. General Alexander Kerensky realized the gravity of the situation, and that his sheer will wouldn't hold people together forever. He realized that hope was the surest medicine for these seemingly hopeless times, and so in the aftermath of the mutiny, he issued General Order 137 on the 5th of November, 2785. The combined address and military order laid the grounds for why they could not go back, and that they must instead task themselves with building a better future. At the core of what would later be called the Hidden Hope Doctrine lays the following passage.
Return to the inner sphere is impossible for us. Our heritage and our convictions are different from those we left behind. The greed of the 5 great houses and the council lords is a disease that can only be burned away by the passing of decades, even centuries. And though the fighting may seem to slow or even cease, it will erupt again as long as there are powerful men to covet one another's wealth. We shall live apart, conserving all the good of the Star League and ridding ourselves of the bad, so that when we return, and return we shall, our shining moral character will be as much our shield as our battle mechs and fighters.
The words were chosen carefully to remind people that this was their choice to prevent the greater potential damage to the inner sphere by staying. He reminded them that by their sacrifice, through committing to this exodus, to renewing their pledges to a noble cause, they were preserving, in some small way, the Star League, what it stood for. And by such noble conduct, they would distinguish themselves forever from the savages they left behind.
I find it interesting because there's this idea of the honorable death kind of already being planted here, right? The idea of we are going to be morally better, we are going to be like a new society. And that has been tried before in history, many times by now. And it always turns out quite badly. And the reason for that is simple, because we're humans. The base form of humanity involves violence, it involves war, and to some degree, those are just parts of us that you can't really get rid of. Those are parts of us that we need to channel instead, that we need to turn from destructive to constructive, in my opinion. That is why I will often tell people who are angry and afraid and sad and frustrated at the world around them, try and build things. Because you can Johnny Silverhand your way through things, you can, like, blast your way through stuff. But at the end of that road is just destruction, right? And that's kind of what the Inner Sphere picked. And to a degree, what the clans end up picking. And instead, I don't know, I feel like there's a better way. I really do feel like there's a better way. And maybe I'm making the same mistake here. I don't know, my thoughts here aren't fully formed. I don't have like a fancy speech here, but yeah. I feel like there's better ways to go. I feel like we have to keep searching, that's for sure.
With this order transmitted to the fleet, there was finally the establishment of something concrete. A foundation of belief was laid out using simple language that all could understand, no longer merely running from the inner sphere. They were going to build something new, something better. The reception to the order was everything General Kerensky could have hoped for the SLDF quickly took it to heart. It stood as a reminder of who they were and why they'd made this choice. For the weary fleet, it also provided necessary direction, and through that, it renewed their purpose. Privately, General Kerensky was wise enough in the domain of the human spirit to know full well that words were not enough in the long term.
Good on him for realizing this, though I will criticize Kerensky a little bit for not doing that before the mutiny.
Sooner or later, the exodus had to come to an end. By 2786, tensions were again beginning to rise. People had faith enough, but it was being sorely tested. By this time, they had been gone from the inner sphere for nearly 2 long years. 2 years of endless jumping, of painstakingly covering their tracks, crammed into ships not designed for patrols this long, let alone extended deployment off the edge of the damn map. On the 24th of August, 2786, the fleet happened upon a godsend. Finally, after all their journey, far from the inner sphere, they found 5 worlds that were reasonably habitable. Finally, they had worlds of their own, and on these worlds, they would begin anew. Little did they know the trouble that would follow, for they had brought their ruination with them. General Alexander Kerensky announced to the fleet that they had finally reached their destination, that the long journey was over, and that the time to build was at hand. Soon after, the colonization of what would become the Pentagon cluster began in earnest. While untamed and by inner sphere standards marginal worlds at best, the Pentagon cluster was ideal for colonization and exploitation for many reasons. The worlds were near perfect distance from each other for combined defense, trade, and resource sharing. As an added strategic bonus, they were shrouded from the inner sphere by the Caliban Nebula, located just a few jumps away. Not that the inner sphere was intent on sending ships out this far to search for them. At 1,300 light years from Terra, they were now far beyond where any man had gone before. And with colonization achieved, with renewed purpose, and with the hope of a new beginning, the peace they had sought for so very long finally looked possible.
I do really like this positive vibe to it to some degree. I think sometimes, especially with things like Battletech or something like 40k, it can get a little bit too grimdark, you know, too negative. I personally believe in like positives. I am an unending optimist and idealist. Maybe a little bit too much, but yeah, I believe in the good of humanity to some degree. And I also believe that humanity isn't perfect, but yeah, I don't know. I believe in the good of humanity.
For nearly a decade, everything went well enough. From 2786 to 2794, there was a time of explosive development, of rapid expansion, and for many, finally, opportunities for healing. General Alexander Kerensky oversaw the creation of Starleague in Exile, a provisional government designed to keep the dream alive, even if 1,300 light-years coreward of the inner sphere. It was a time of such prosperity that colonization efforts were soon enough directed to other worlds, namely the nearby stars of what was soon called the Kerensky Cluster. But it was not long before such prosperity would be challenged.
Oh boy. Alright, get yourself a snack or a drink or something. Bada-bada-bum. Factovision? What is Factovision? Yeah, that sounds about right. Having been working on my own thing called Armia After Hours, the latest case has been so far 5 weeks of editing. Probably gonna be at least 6 by the time it's done. So yeah, I feel that. Plus a lot of voice work, etc. And that's not including like stuff like research that they're doing. So yeah, this is I do have massive respect for the amount of work they put in. I hope that's very clear because yeah. Yeah, that's true, actually. Fun fact, actually, about sponsorships. I've had this, I recently had a sponsorship for Arknight's Enfield, right? And I took the sponsorship on one condition, where I went, can I say whatever I want? Like, positives or negatives? And they actually said yes. Like, good on them. They actually said yes. So on my stream about that, I took that particular paycheck and I was nice to the game in some ways and very mean in some other ways. Star Trek.
Please, Captain, whatever you do, if you kill me, at least don't tell Stella. I don't want her to be at my funeral.
He stares at him, and he takes a long pull on a cigar, and he punches him like 12 times in the face.
I considered skipping this section, but this is kinda neat. I don't receive mechs from the Battletech community. He doesn't know what to say other than a holy hag. The uncomfortable feeling of being honored. Here they are. Oh, that's awesome! That's a lot of mechs. Good dang. We have here, we have a Raven. Obviously an Atlas, very obviously. I don't instantly recognize all the mechs because I'm bad at this, but Urban Mech, hey, I think that's a Griffin with the like tube on the back. Yeah, very nice. Maybe has a
You
mayor.
want to crush a country that
Fuck you.
doesn't exist.
Fred, please.
Belgium doesn't even exist.
Maintain some decorum, Fred.
Hold on, hey, I'm Belgian. Hold on a second.
Please.
He has no parent yet. Every few months we elect a new one. Just beeping out things. That's very fun. Also, I find, as an aside, I find it really funny how Belgium doesn't exist. So like Belgium is like the godless Belgians and stuff like that is like a meme. I find that so entertaining. It's so fun. Give me more Belgium hate, please. Right, what? Oh, that's gross. Aw. Here's the thing. So, Tex is a creative. Creatives always hate themselves and their own works. How do I know this? I'm a creative. No, I'm being a bit hyperbolic, but it is like, yeah, like it's very easy to focus on your negatives rather than your positives. It's a constant struggle, and I respect it. Good lord, I'm so yappy today. I found that gasoline is flammable. What? I said that the helmet can go anywhere if you hold the throttle. Oh no! Oh no. Except me, there's hot dogs. Really now? It's terrified of To be fair, Gary Busey is scary. 2 vacations in 4 years. The BBL forced them to take both. Yep, that's a mood. Mr. Tuck Davian started a fundraiser to force him on one. The courtesy Fush is the most entertaining stream in the intertubes, but only cool kids watch it. Next one's made U-boat art. He's trying to replicate Matisse and Van Gogh's, but with U-boats. Here's a sample. That's a cool idea. Oh, wait, that's actually really good. What? Like impressionism, but with U-boats. Oh, I like that actually. That's really cool. And I'm a big fan of impressionism as a style, so this really speaks to me. I like it. Oh, and then Van Gogh, also cool. Good on him, honestly, for trying that. Oh, that one is difficult to spot at first, but I quite like it actually, as well. Doesn't care if you steal those. I do like this that they add an intermission. That's kind of nice. You pay the guy he'll write you music. Honestly, I do need some music for some stuff, so I'll keep it in mind. Favorite 10 games in no order. Alright, let's see if Tex has good taste. Mountain Blade, okay. Yeah, that's a very fair one. Space Station 13. Fair enough. Not my jam, but very fair. Arcanum. Okay. Respect it. I respect it big time because that one is... It's such an underrated gem. It really is. Diablo 2, never played. I need to play Diablo at some point. The first 2 Fallouts, very good. However, if you want to play them nowadays, be prepared because they are kind of clunky by today's standards. They are really good, but they are kind of clunky. Fallout New Vegas, also very good game. Dwarf Fortress, very good. Homeworld, actually, to some degree, Homeworld as well parallels the kind of Exodus as well, so that's kind of cool. And Jagged Alliance 2, I don't think I've played that one. That's one I'll need to try at some point. But yeah, pretty good choices, I'd say. Unreal. Oh, Unreal Tournament? Warcraft, yeah, fair enough. Arcanum, again, good choice. Breath of Fire, I haven't played that. Wolf 3D, no idea what that is. I'm sorry, I'm too zoomer for this. Guys, I was born in the 21st millennium. In 21st millennium? What? In the 3rd millennium. I don't know what Wolf 3D is. Some of these I do know though, like Tomb Raider. I do wonder if Hitman, if it's like the modern Hitman or the original, because both are good. Repping the game store, I respect it. Texas friend Rob is the best game store owner in the world. Also has a fully painted squats army. If you undertake the pilgrimage to see him, bring him a sandwich. He likes those. What kind of sandwich though? Like a bacon one? Everyone likes bacon, right? So Tex and Mike have seen every episode of Star Trek at least 5 times. Very fair. Except Discovery. Tex refuses. Fair enough. I haven't watched Discovery myself yet, but I did like the Lower Decks, personally. I quotes it to him in order to cause him to cause rage. Tex's current favorite space show on the air is The Expanse! Hey! I literally did a stream on the upcoming Expanse game, and I'm going to be doing the Telltale Expanse game as well in the near future. So, hey Tex, drop by. We can nerd out about sci-fi sometime. Next things well done should be removed as an option at any steakhouse. Disagree. And I'm gonna take a hot take here, and that's gonna anger so many people. It's gonna anger so many people. The best way to eat Wagyu is well done. That's right, I said it. I sound posh. I know how to eat posh steak. I didn't know what Battletech was before he started editing these videos. Oh, that's funny. But, oh yeah, Robotech is cool, which makes Tech sad. Mars' love part 2 is actually Mike. He's freaking scary. Yeah, just going. Mike once put ice into a jar of pickle juice and drank it through a straw while editing in college. Yeah, sounds about right. Oh my god, actually, Okay, I need to tell this story. So, in college, somebody dared me to go to class in my bathrobes and slippers. So I did. Just like underwear, bathrobes, slippers, and just I just walked in. And I was like, hi, how are you doing? And just sat down in the lobby. It was like film history as well, which was really, really fun. Tex doesn't watch anime and had to have the word senpai explained to him. Oh boy. I wonder what Tex thinks of VTubers. His favorite Tech episode is not Masks, because it's awful. Masks. I don't know that one. An episode is near completion. Tex and Mike are exhausted. Tex will do his George Lucas impression. Hmm? Pretty okay, but it's funny. Okay, fair enough. Mike thinks Nicholas Kerensky's picture looks like Ray's Bannon from Johnny Quest. I don't know Johnny Quest, so I can't really judge that. I guess? If you squint a little bit. Yeah. I guess. None of our bearers gonna sue us for that. Oh wait, they died in 2001. They did. Mike and Tex have seen all the hot Amaris memes from the last two-parter. I definitely need to watch the two-parter. Oh, we want to say what's wrong with you. I mean, look. You ever heard of monster lovers? That kind of does apply to horrible people, too. Maybe we has me to blame. Yeah, I mean... Ex's concealed carry used to be a custom-tuned 44 Magnum. This is such an American thing, because I've seen, like, in real life, in person, I've seen, like, 3 guns in my entire life. Because I live in a country that doesn't have everybody shoot each other. Sorry, that might be a little bit mean, because, like, I realize that's not actually how it works in America. I know, it's not that bad. I know. It's just one of those things where, like, America is very weird about guns to me, because a gun here is like a big deal, and having one is a sign of competence, honestly, like, because you need to go through a lot of paperwork and practice and all kinds of other stuff that you need to prove yourself in order to get one. But in America, you can seemingly, I could be wrong about this, it might depend on state per state. In America, it seems like you can just walk into a Walmart and just grab a gun, which is crazy as like an idea to me. Favorite composers: Schubert, Beethoven, Mozart, Chopin, Philip Sullivan, Johnny Cash. Yeah, some good ones in here. Wagner is okay. Wagner is okay. I'm gonna say it. Wagner is overrated and is kind of just a pompous. Is very pompous in my opinion, but you know, a lot of these other ones, fair enough. Rolling Stones are good. Artifacts, so here's text proving you can get more or less centimeters accuracy wielding wheelgats. Wheelgats? Oh my god. That's the most American thing I've ever seen. Love that. I do like seeing the intermission, that is neat. It's funny because, like, but before we continue, really quickly, you can tell Battletech's general audience is a bit older, right? And to be clear, that's not a bad thing. I want to be very clear when I say that. That is not a bad thing. It's just interesting because, like, it is very rooted in that sort of 80s, 90s kind of era, which is kind of true for things like Cyberpunk, for example, as well, which I think is very interesting.
After thoroughly surveying the worlds and making as certain as possible they were suitable for permanent colonization, the SLDF fleet began to rapidly shift from survival in space to a dedicated colonization effort. It was a fundamental change in mission parameters, so unused equipment, weapons, and warships were placed into storage or mothballs for later use if necessary. Few thought they'd need to touch a weapon in the near future, and for some, the conversion from a military life to a civilian one wasn't exactly a smooth transition. The SLDF found themselves in a case of turning swords into plowshares.
Again, institutionalized.
And much formerly military equipment was immediately pressed into service in the name of survival, or cannibalized for parts to keep people alive.
Understandable.
However,
I'm just imagining like an Atlas having to do agricultural duties for some reason, which, as an image, is actually really cool. Like, imagine like a painting of an Atlas having like a massive scythe doing like agricultural work. I know, that wouldn't be the most efficient or anything like that, but hey, if you have it and you need something to like scythe the fields, you know.
there was the ever-present issue of manpower. After all, a colony in a delicate balance of survival doesn't need 100 divisions of fighting men and women. Colonies need civilian infrastructure. They were in need of hard work, sweat and determination focused on making a go at it, and so a fundamental change in the order of things was absolutely necessary for Starleague in Exile to survive at all. Starleague in Exile began to force the majority of the SLDF to test out and become civilians. The controlled demobilization required every member of the SLDF test.
Plowshares program. Turn in your rifle and pick up a hole. You fought Armaras, now fight boredom and oppression. And depression, oh no. Corn, the new war. Free tractor with every uniform done.
Or be forced out. Only the best of the best would stay in uniform, and the rest would become the genesis of a new civilian working class. 75% of the SLDF tested out, from the lowest ranking soldier to the highest ranking general. Only those of extraordinary aptitude, skill, and health were allowed to stay in uniform. The now unneeded vast arsenals of weaponry were placed into stockpiles called Brian caches, paying homage to Starleague's own Castles Brian. Warships were placed into reserve fleets or mothballed around planetary bodies in the event they'd ever be needed in the future. Parts of the fleet lived on, and many of the demobilized SLDF served in a newly established group called the Explorers Corps, who began to chart nearby star systems for habitable worlds and exploitable resources.
I won't lie, that is definitely the kind of role I would want. Just like exploring around and trying to find new resources and stuff like that. That is definitely the kind of role I find very interesting.
While the demobilizations were necessary for survival, it seems in retrospect optimistic, or at the very least hopeful, to believe for such a massive change overnight to succeed. Many of these brave men and women had seen decades of horrific combat, all of them deeply bearing the scars of their campaigns in some way or another, with most unable to forget the horrors of classed worlds and burning cities. Turning most of them into civilians, forcing them to change their lifestyle overnight was a gamble. While some adapted well enough, many had long ago forgotten how to be civilians or, in some cases, even civil. People who had suffered through campaign after campaign hardly felt rewarded for being told to now farm and like it. A new life forced upon them, and then with a complete lack of basic amenities, let alone any form of luxury, set the stage for future discontent.
Not gonna lie, this entire time, this entire time, I feel like what they really needed wasn't, better food. It wasn't luxury. It wasn't like a specific institution or anything like that. It wasn't Kerensky giving speeches. They just needed an army of psychologists, like straight up. Like actually, and I guess this is kind of a little bit of commentary about how quite often soldiers are treated in our own society, right? Whether that be America or Europe or Russia or wherever. Oftentimes, they go to war, they come back, and they're just expected to pick up the slack as they were, which doesn't always work, Like, if you've seen horrific things happen, you can't just easily move on from that, and you do need help processing that, because, yeah, which is also often compounded by the fact that a lot of these people, being very self-reliant and being forced to be very self-reliant, aren't exactly willing to show weakness, which isn't their fault. It's just, yeah.
For a time, though, the SLDF took to their new lives without much complaint. It was, after all, a welcome reprieve from years of cramped starship living, wandering the cosmos aimlessly in the horrors of their now distant past.
There is definitely something nice about, like, a new planet to live on, right?
Kerensky closed the book on the past as best he could, by broadcasting toward the inner sphere a final message. The Voice of Kerensky broadcast we covered in the Ameris Civil War lecture series, but it is absolutely worth bringing up again for historical reference as a companion to the Hidden Hope doctrine. The Voice of Kerensky message was one of hope, conveying that perhaps one day the inner sphere would not be a place of turmoil, and that future generations may learn to live among each other in peace. Broadcast September the 9th, 2786, the Voice of Kerensky message would take at least 1,000 years to reach the inner sphere on broadband carrier waves. It was a message of hope, but prudent enough to be sent the slowest means possible. It would be time enough for people to grow up, time enough for people to find a better way. In theory, anyways. But
I don't believe the timeline actually reaches that point of the voice of Kerensky reaching the Innisphere. And I do like the idea of that, like maybe there's some big event happening, and then the voice of Kerensky rings out 1,000 years after he died. And just something happens. Like, I'm not saying, everybody lays down their arms and sings Kumbaya, but, just a poignant moment. That would be plenty for me.
by strange coincidence, that very message would only be heard 260 short years later, but
Oh,
that's a whole nother story.
never mind. I am being silly.
For a short time, though, there was indeed peace and prosperity for Starleague in exile. Cities were built, houses became homes, people farmed, started families, and did their best to forget their troubles. And folks did their best to start over. In 2800, things began to change. Perhaps it was the age of their leader, as Alexander Kerensky was by this time 100 years old and straining even the life expectancy afforded by the very best in advanced Starleague medical knowledge. He'd not had, by any standards, an easy life, and with many long decades of stress, pain, and loss wearing down on him, he was struggling to hold a dream together with zero room for error. He was weighed down by his most recent and perhaps deepest sorrow, as just 4 years earlier his wife Katyusha had contracted a virus, grown ill, and died. This when
I do feel bad for Alexander Kerensky, because as much as I will criticize him sometimes for some of the choices he makes, and where like sometimes I think some of the choices would have been better or something like that, he is at the very least trying to do the right thing. Like, say what you will about the guy, but he's trying to do the right thing. He's trying to be a good guy, and I do feel bad for him because I feel like he lives in a universe where that doesn't really get rewarded.
coupled with his advanced age meant he was unable to tend to Starleague in exile with his former vigor. The depressed ancient general couldn't hold the reins of power with the strength he once did, and certainly didn't trust his sons to assume those responsibilities for him. And so, slowly, things began to fall apart. At least that is one interpretation of events. I'm going to give you a different reason for what happened next. 2 words. Capellan fuckery.
Oh?
Let me elaborate. I see the genesis of the problem as that once peace had taken root and people began to muster out of Starleague, they had not only cast away their uniforms, but a military mindset without the discipline of a daily regimen, commands to be obeyed, and consequences for disobeying them. Order starts to break down, and a disorderly former SLDF soldier was probably at this point in time the most dangerous thing in the goddamn galaxy.
Very true. Another thing that, for example, post-war America had to deal with, actually.
There's also another overlooked benefit of a uniform, as it is a reminder of which side you're on. When you're in uniform and following a cause, as the SLDF had up to this point, it didn't matter where you were from or what you thought, so much as what you were fighting for. In uniform, it's easier to overlook the shortcomings of your brothers and sisters in arms because they're part of the same mission as you are. You're looking out for them and they you. The situation may suck, but so long as you're in it together, everyone stands to benefit. It is further worth noting that by design, the SLDF was a multinational, multicultural fighting force for the benefit of the entire Starleague.
And honestly, in my opinion, diversity is an absolute strength, as the SLDF shows for a very long time.
So that not a single house nor personal allegiance was allowed to interfere with the dedication of duty to the state above all. In a Starleague uniform, you were fighting for the men and women at your side under the flag you carried, and nothing else really mattered. But with Amaris long dead, Starleague long gone, and now with nothing to do They tried to start a new life. People had to define, perhaps for the very first time, what mattered to them most. People being people, falling back on old ways was easiest. And soon old loyalties and a re-emergence of successor state ideologies began to take root. Before long, relative prosperity and expansionism itself began to drive a wedge between various factions, all eagerly attempting to exploit the same limited resources. And there's something most of you should know by now. Never trust a Capellan.
I'm sorry, I like the Capellans. I find them way too interesting. Do I trust them? No, absolutely not. Do I think they're crazy? Uh-huh. But do I find them very interesting? Absolutely.
Because their favorite sheath for any blade they have is your back. On a jungle world now named Eden, small-scale clashes, skirmishes and disorderly riots broke out between colonists of the Federated Suns and the Capellan Confederation. People had by now fallen in line with ideologies carried from the inner sphere and banded together to fight those of opposing loyalties. People were initially content to riot and skirmish for a time as old enemies decided to finally hash things out, sadly mirroring events in the inner sphere unfolding simultaneously. It can be said that old hatreds die hard, while lawlessness was initially suppressed by those few SLDFs still in uniform, and what modest resources they still had available. They couldn't be everywhere at once. And so, in 2801, open rebellion had broken out. Rebel forces, nearly all of them Capellan, decided to declare independence from Starleague and exile in May of that year. They were not merely content to say, "We quit, we're out, thanks for the ride and the colony and keeping us alive, General Kerensky." No, they were intent on making a new state from the ground up and curb-stomping anyone who got in their way. To further
Yeah, not the greatest way of going about things.
the strategic aim, they seized mothballed weapons and equipment from the tremendous arsenals they'd built years earlier to arm their new state and begin fighting their neighbors, folks loyal to the Federated Suns, with everything at their disposal.
I do find it interesting that during the Exodus, efforts weren't made to erode those old ideologies and old loyalties. You have a multicultural and disciplined force that's all working together towards one thing. Make them work together. Don't have factionalism in your, tribes, so to speak. Genghis Khan did this, for example. What he would do is he would take a new tribe that would enter the general army, right? Genghis Khan's army, and he would purposely reward those who were doing well, and also place parts of those tribes with other tribes. So that way they were forced to intermingle, they were forced to work together, and that way you form brotherhoods, you form connections. And even when those same people then settled down, they were all part of the Mongol Empire. And sure, eventually the Mongol Empire fell apart, but that's a bit of a different story. And I feel like here, the fact that that wasn't done is a big, not a mark against Kerensky necessarily, but more of a bit of a tragedy, quite frankly, because it could have been fixed. You can absolutely have people work together, especially with something like the Exodus, when there is a lot of pressure, when you're all trying to go in one direction, right? Like, they mentioned the uniform, but there's more than the uniform to look at.
Being that most of the population was quite familiar with how to effectively wage warfare, these rebels were not your weekend warriors playing games. With the SLDF being a bare handful of soldiers at this point, peacekeeping efforts soon failed, and the situation rapidly spiraled out of control. Few thought that
Aspirate.
soldiers who had sacrificed so much would eagerly betray their fellows for territory, resources, and loot, but Capellans will ruin anything, as is their custom. Maybe it was the sirens blaring, or people losing their shit, or just that familiar sense of chaos needing desperate leadership, but the rebellion broke Alexander Kerensky's torpor, pushed back the fog, and brought him back to the front. Yes, 101-year-old General Alexander Kerensky had had enough of this nonsense, and he acted to put an end to this. He dispatched his most loyal SLDF troops, led by his right hand from the American Civil War, General Aaron D. Chevalier, and backed him up with Major Elizabeth Hazen of Black Watch fame.
Oh boy. Well, everybody's dead. Everybody involved is dead, but also, while it's good that Kerensky obviously puts out the fire, and I don't want to blame him too much, because at this point he's 101, I feel like the people around him should have been more proactive with this stuff. You should be getting onto... You should be more proactive in preventing these kind of conflicts rather than killing everyone after the fact, you know? You don't have a lot of people out there, presumably. I don't actually know how many future clanners would, like, live there, but yeah, it's a toughie, I think, because in these kind of situations, it's better to prevent than to heal, I feel like. And sure, they're very good at healing, or crushing, I suppose. They're not very good at preventing.
Objective was to stop the rebellion from spreading, to preserve Starleague in exile, and as necessary, destroy all opposition to good order. They were sent to put an end to this senseless violence and prevent further chaos from spreading in its wake. Eden was a dense, mostly untamed tropical jungle and filled with plenty of spaces to stage an ambush. Capellan forces had dug in deep and prepared the battlefield for the coming onslaught. When the loyalist SLDF forces made landfall, they found that the situation was worse than they were led to believe. Capellans had already done what they do best, which is lay traps and prepare to kill their former allies. As the SLDF forces approached the rebel encampments, Major Hazen's mech fell into a particularly devilish trap, a giant pit of oil that touched off the instant the mech fell in.
Oh, dang.
That's not to say Major Hazen had grown soft, mind you, because Capellans have a PhD in backstab, betrayal, and traps like this. But with no way out and the mech rendered combat ineffective, Major Hazen ejected. Capellans being Capellans, they opened fire on the ejecting mech warrior with everything they had. Major Elizabeth Hazen, SLDF legend, Black Watch hero, and survivor of the American Civil War, took a heavy caliber slug to the neuro helmet mid-ejection and was out of the fight. For a few minutes. Yes, the Black Watch is...
Oh my god. Okay, look, as much as I criticize some of the decision making here, that is so badass. Takes a 40mm slug to the face, alright? I didn't hear no bell.
that hard to kill. Being shot in the head is a minor fucking inconvenience. When she awoke, head ringing and angry as all hell, she found General D. Chevalier heavily engaged in close combat with the rebels. I have not touched on the brave madness of General Aaron D. Chevalier, one of the most loyal men Kerensky could have ever have hoped for. This was a man, after all, who years earlier was willing to wage war on all of the great houses to restore Starleague. The short version of his career is thus. He was born in the Federated Sons, a survivor of the War of Davion Succession, an elite academy grad, an SLDF hero, and a veteran of the 320th Dragoon Regiment, which was later tragically annihilated during the Hegemony campaign. He was a fierce competitor, and in his youth had placed in the Martial Olympiad of 2736. He was a graduate of the Elite Gunslinger program, the same program that bred the Black Watch Elite Training Regiment. He led the heaviest fighting in the Third Hidden War. He'd hunted pirates. He made it to Lieutenant General before he even met Kerensky, and rose to Division Commander before the American-Civil War even began. He was known as being a fearless, ceaseless motivator who tirelessly stood his post, worked as hard as he could, and never gave up. The man had a reputation for being fearless in the face of impossible odds, as he demonstrated by using the sharp, pointy stick of the SLDF Navy to raid Amaris while Kerensky curb-stomped the periphery in Amaris' own Rimworld's Republic. He also knew what it meant to sacrifice for the greater good. Of his 5 children, 2 were killed by Stefan Amaris as they tried to find and protect members of House Cameron. His 2 oldest children died during Operation Chieftain, both having served as SLDF veterans and both having laid down their lives to try to take the hegemony back from Amaris. De Chevalier did not shirk from duty or responsibility, so when the general said, "Make rebels go away," he waded in without second thought.
I'm gonna lie, a very interesting thing I'm noticing is that everyone in the SLDF is hard as heck, which I do like, I admit. They should be. They're veterans. They have seen decades and decades of war. They should be battle-hardened. So, this is good. I like it.
So Major Hazen wakes up from a mild case of bullet to the neuro helmet to see an old Star League general with near 7 decades of military service stomping into the fray in his Atlas. Maybe it was past his bedtime, or maybe he was tired of this nonsense, or maybe he just wanted peace for once. But De Chevalier was thoroughly unamused by this Capellan bullshit and set himself to take care of this problem at point-blank range. And fatefully for him, that is what the Capellans had been waiting for. As he waded in, as some would say, to shield the ambushed SLDF units and buy time for a regroup, the rebels struck with full force. Using the full weight of their infantry, well-placed artillery, and sheer numbers, they overwhelmed the Atlas. De Chevalier didn't eject because to stop fighting and retreat would only endanger his men. He gave his last orders. He stayed at his controls and he went down swinging. They destroyed one leg, they disabled his mech, and he continued to fight like a madman. He was bellowing orders and firing every functional weapon he had, trying to hold back the jaws of defeat with every ounce of his soul. But no man is immortal. With wave after wave of Inferno missiles tearing into the Atlas, General De Chevalier died in a blaze of glory. And some would say that is the turning point. There was no way back now. A good man killed for no good reason. The uprising, the American-Civil War, and now the Exodus had, up to this point, claimed plenty of folks under similar circumstances.
Before we go on, hold on. Is it bad that I kind of like the Capellans in this? I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I know it's like, you know, the brave general and like, I get it. I really do. I see the appeal. But you know what? In this moment, in this battle, right? Like, not talking about the conquering the rest of the new Star League. That's dumb. And the whole rebellion is dumb, right? 100%. But in this specific battle, the Capellans are wrecking the SLDF. I can't fault them in this battle itself. Like the rest of it, yeah, absolutely. I'll condemn the heck out of them for that, but this battle, they have pretty much defeated them so far. So, yeah, I don't know. I can't be mad at them.
During the American-Civil War, entire worlds were glassed, put to the nuclear torch for no reason other than it denied Kerensky a staging point. Entire populations had been enslaved, starved, and gassed to prove Ameris wasn't going to go gently. Total war does that to a population. It relegates the act of killing to an industrial scale.
Yeah.
And yet, with that war long over, and the trials past, with the hard times now behind them, somehow the worst of the Inner Sphere had been carried with them on the Exodus to this new frontier and manifested again to wreak havoc. The once mighty men and women of the SLDF were now turning their guns on each other and fighting with the same ferocity they'd used on Amaris. What happened next is only rumored, as rebels didn't get a chance to really write much of a record of that event. And why that is, I'll get to presently. For with Hazen's fury unleashed, what had been a battle would now be remembered as a massacre. Major Elizabeth Hazen was thoroughly tired of this nonsense. She'd seen too many die. She'd seen too many fall in the line of duty, and this single death had stoked a flame deep in her heart, and this final act of betrayal was a catalyst for her rage. Sources say she emerged from the jungle in fury and grief, and most assuredly about to kick some ass. Perhaps bagpipes played in her distant memory, perhaps with enough comrades lost along the way, the Black Watch officer had just finally snapped. What is known is she picked up a sword from a dead Capellan rebel and charged, and she just started cutting people apart. Any Capellan she saw died. Any who ran died tired. Any who begged for mercy found there was none to be had, at least not on this day. Her mad charge on foot with blood in her eyes and sword in her hand, with furious rage guiding it, proceeded to tear through Capellan lines. This insane act of defiance, a mad charge into overwhelming numbers to avenge the fallen, rallied the SLDF, because watching a Black Watch commander wading into a furious gun battle with just a sword, screaming bloody vengeance, was just the sort of thing to spark their spirit. So they
Okay, first of all, awesome. Very freaking cool. Love it. It is ridiculous and I adore it. It's funny because I couldn't help but think, like, this is how you know it's fiction, because in real life, she would have charged in, maybe gotten one guy, maybe even two, maybe even three, and then she would have gotten gunned down just instantly. Because, yeah, like firefights are no place for a sword. They really aren't. But, you know what? I'm not gonna be like, it's not realistic. Meh." This is very cool. I do enjoy this.
They joined her, and absolute carnage followed. No rebels survived that battle, or the next one, or the one after that. Hazen didn't just turn the tide of a battle. She went on to annihilate every Capellan rebel she could find on the planet and vowed vengeance on any who dared to stand in her way.
In my opinion, that sword should be named. I hope it is.
Eden's population fell that day, and that particular rebellion was made extinct. But the much diminished SLDF couldn't be everywhere at once. The news of General de Chevalier's death and the chaos which followed emboldened the rebel factions, and soon there was a full-on civil war. Faction after faction seized the moment and declared independence. There was absolute chaos as neighbor turned on neighbor, faction on faction, armed with the sheer volume of weaponry the Exodus fleet had carried from the inner sphere. Everyone had realized without a unifying SLDF, without a unifying cause, they were out for themselves, and joining one of the many emerging factions was the only way to stay alive. Star League in exile was now dead, a casualty of desperate people resorting to what they felt was their best option at that point in time. And, sadly, there was to be one more casualty. The death of his friend, his ally, his confidant, General de Chevalier, hit Alexander Kerensky hard. He was in the planning stages on striking back at the rebels, but sadly, on the 8th of June 2801, he died of a massive heart attack. The worst of the inner sphere had been carried with him on the Exodus, and then in a moment of strife, manifested among colonies they had founded, and there would be no going back to the brief peace they had achieved. SLDF veterans, at least those who'd not been forced to muster out, those who had only known and chose to maintain a soldier's life, were for the first time truly leaderless. The Star League in exile was now gone, Reduced to a series of factions closely mirroring their inner sphere counterparts, each faction vying for supremacy, were now all too eager to wield the vast arsenals they had stockpiled, and through them began to forge new states for themselves. SLDF commanders in the field either fell in with the factions or died trying to put them down, in what would soon become the Exodus Civil War, in essence a microcosm of the First Succession War. The surviving SLDF leadership remained paralyzed. Each of the remaining generals tried to assert their own claims to Kerensky's legacy or began siding with one faction or another. But Nicholas Kerensky had his own ambitions. Perhaps it
Not gonna lie, it reminds me a little bit of I forget the name of the generals, but like Alexander's generals, right? So, for those who don't know, Alexander the Great, right, conquers pretty much all of the known world at the time, and dies, and the successors, his generals, take control of parts of his empire, Ptolemy, the Seleucids, that kind of stuff. It feels very similar, this sort of, the fighting between the factions. I do feel bad for Kerensky, I have to admit, Alexander Kerensky specifically, because like I mentioned, while I will criticize him for some of his decisions, and while I think, in general, there seems to be almost like the idea that guns can solve civilian problems sometimes. Um, Sometimes, he clearly tried to do the right thing at the very least, and that I do respect. And it's a bit sad that he arrived and he died trying to put down yet another rebellion. He never got a day of peace. Not really. That's a shame. It really is.
was a result of having lived in his father's shadow all of these years. Perhaps it was watching his father's noble dream die before him. Perhaps it was the cycles of grief and loss he'd seen in the course of his life. His father, his mother, Starleague in exile. All were gone now. But there's another consideration for what he did next. I feel his previous illness had something to do with it. Nicholas had caught the same brain fever his mother had, a disease that wreaked havoc on the early colonization efforts and known to cause extensive brain damage in its victims. He'd fought it for 2 weeks on the verge of death, and yet he'd survived.
Dang,
I feel
okay.
that changed him. In the wake of his father's death, Nicholas Kerensky claimed leadership of the SLDF. He didn't see himself as a son of a great man any longer. He saw himself as the heir of a noble ideology, a legacy that could in time save them all. The SLDF and all it represented would be his. He would keep the dream alive. It wasn't the craziest thing to claim. After all, that's Inner Sphere standard operations. New boss inherits the job of the old boss. And Nicholas Kerensky saw himself now as a great man, that now was his time. His destiny was laid before him.
Oh boy.
Most of the division commanders decided to take their chances anywhere else. Most of them had no interest in following the unproven son of Alexander Kerensky in any capacity. Those who didn't laugh in his face politely walked away from his notions of grandeur. You have to try to understand their reasoning. Nicholas Kerensky had not fought as they had in the Civil War. He knew nothing of command, of war outside of history books. He was merely the son of the great General Alexander Kerensky. The great general was now dead. From their perspective, his noble dream of a Starleague in exile had died with him. Many of the veteran commanders of the Civil War were dead or ancient or fully intent on carving what territory they could as warlords and wrecking their neighbors in the process. With as many weapons, warships, and supplies as they had, there was now no course but war. So why not fight it out? They saw their best option.
Oh dear, oh dear, oh dear. Like I mentioned, like the successors to Alexander, it's bothering me, that name. I'll look it up.
As to throw in with an existing faction and do their best to survive. It was the Inner Sphere way, after all. Joining the son, the presumed heir of a great leader, and trusting his ability to restore order was a leap of faith that few were willing to take at this point. After all, the last leap of faith they'd taken resulted in what promised to be a gruesome conflict and all the ruin that it entailed. But that's not to say General Kerensky's sons were alone. Despite everything up to this point and the hopelessness of the situation, some still believed, fanatically. So Nicholas Kerensky gathered those most loyal to him, or if not him, his father's cause, which he had now assumed as his own.
I found the name, by the way, Diadoki. But also, oh boy, we got civil wars in civil wars at this point.
Told them that the Pentagon worlds were now doomed and that they must commit to a second exodus, to leave all of the factions behind, to leave the poison of the inner sphere's politics behind and start a new society. I ask myself, what kind of people would be willing to walk away from that, to take one last jump, to follow the son of a great leader in pursuit of an ideology not quite clearly defined?
Fanatics.
Well, people who are dreamers, for one. Nicholas Kerensky may not have been the ideal man for the job at hand, but perhaps the only man remaining with any semblance of a vision. Enough of them did see him as the inheritor of his father's dream. Nicholas, in turn, went to every Pentagon world and made his objective known. He wanted to escape the violence of what was now being called the Exodus Civil War, and to carry the true legacy of Starleague onward. He wanted to leave the cycles of tragedy and violence the Inner Sphere had always known. From the Pentagon cluster, a bare few thousand volunteers joined him, and with what resources they could take, they jumped. They landed on a recently colonized world in the nearby Kerensky cluster. In Russian, it means dream country. To his credit, Nicholas Kerensky later came back to save as many as he could. It was January 2802, Major General Nicholas Kerensky, yes, he'd given himself that accolade, Major
Of course.
General, began using the assembled remnants of the SLDF Navy and carefully organized a exfiltration from the Pentagon Civil War of over a quarter of the surviving civilian population to this new world, adding to his meager resources nearly 1 million farmers, merchants, and workers.
Before we move on for Nicholas, something just popped into my head. And I feel bad because I feel like I'm being so mean to Alexander Kerensky. I really do. But you know what? He should have designated a successor. He should have. Whether it be Nicholas or Andrei or one of his generals, it doesn't matter. He should have designated a single successor that he very clearly endorsed and readied for command. Because no man, no woman, nobody lives forever, and eventually somebody was going to have to take over. Kerensky was not a dumb person. Alexander Kerensky was not a dumb person. He would have been able to see, I'm 101, sooner or later I'm going to keel over. And sure, at this point he's old, he's tired, he is just kind of going through the motions. But honestly, that should have been done 20 years before. Should have had a perfect idea of, this is the person I want to lead, and this is the person I'm going to prepare to take over when I pass. This is a crucial flaw that a lot of people through history actually have. It's a flaw that Genghis Khan had. It's a flaw that Bismarck had. It's a flaw that just about anyone who believes themselves to be a great and powerful leader had. And I think, in a way, it does show that Alexander was not immune to the Amarician way of thinking, that tyranny. And that even though he tried to do good, and he tried to be a good person, and Amaris is an absolute clown by comparison, sometimes that can still seep through the cracks.
Further, his forces were bolstered by the majority of the Navy having opted to side with him rather than duke it out with capital-scale weapons over what amounted to a handful of planets and the so-called leaders who were now fighting for dominion over them. However, of the mech jocks, aerospace pilots, infantry, and tankers of the SLDF Exodus forces, only the 146th and 149th Divisions fully sided with him in his dream. From his new vantage point, Nicholas saw the cycles of history were inescapable. Humanity in its current state would endure only occasional peace before solving things the old way. Good old-fashioned warfare vis-a-vis grade A war crimes. He realized that the SLDF had left the inner sphere only to burn new worlds in the name of whatever cause they could drum up. He saw old ways of thinking, inner sphere ways of thinking, to be toxic and a direct contributor to what was now unfolding. Knew that in time, this second exodus could very well do the same unless drastic action was taken. This
Okay.
new world had every potential to become a messy battleground in time, unless he were to change everything. He saw that changes were absolutely necessary to prevent a future world from burning what he intended to make. Drastic changes, and not just what a society stood for, but the very fabric of society itself. What if he were to change the balance of a society, its aim, governance, and focus? The old ways to him were flawed as they gave into biases, beliefs, and allegiances, which inevitably resulted in mutual annihilation, and he saw himself as a great man, the father of a new nation, guided by righteous ideologies given to him by his father.
Oh
He was
boy.
precisely the individual to forge a new civilization to correct the flaws of the old. And so, in the name of his father's legacy and in his own avowed belief in the nobility of Starleague as an ideology, he reshaped the world from the top down. He saw himself as prime architect of this new world, and this would be a new society, free of cultural bias, of prejudice, of backward belief systems, and any allegiance to the old ways, or as he saw them, backward thinking. Nicholas envisaged a new society founded principally on meritocracy, not the inherited power dynasties of the inner sphere, but it would be a divisive society.
Not necessarily the worst idea in concept. I mean, meritocracy. Everybody likes meritocracy in concept, right? Like, it's a good concept. Like, people who are good at things get promoted to be, you know, like, get given the resources to be better at the things they're doing. It's not a bad concept. Problem is often that doesn't quite turn out that way.
By the warrior elite, the best, the bravest, and brightest that they had, being a bit of a madman, perhaps as a result of his earlier mental trauma, serious illness, or just zealous belief in his own wisdom. He borrowed ideas from history that fit his vision for a utopian society. Upon closer examinations, it would be clear that he'd taken policies and governance designs from various powerful factions of ancient Terran history, from the Mongol hordes to honor-bound shogunate-era Japan, and even the strict totalitarianism of the 20th century Chinese state. Using these ideas, he created a template for a brave new world, one which would hopefully allow for the old ways of the inner sphere to be finally buried.
That is fair. Well, I think the idea of putting totalitarianism in there is a bad one. The idea itself isn't necessarily a bad one. The result is, less fantastic, but, we'll get there.
He'd split his chosen people into 20 organized units, which he soon called clans. For
Oh
each
boy.
of them, he would choose a totem he felt represented a facet of their identity. They went along with this, as, after all they had lost, they were united in one thing principally at this point: faith. And wearing the mantle of his father's legacy, he would shape that faith into what followed. At the heart of
I will say, I think I think there's an inherent bit of comedy amongst, we will do better than the inner sphere. Instead of 5 factions, we will have 20! This is why I sometimes clown on the clans.
Each clan was a reinforced mech warrior battalion of 40 warriors. Of the thousands and thousands of troops who had joined his exodus, he rigorously tested each warrior on their abilities to allow only the very best to continue to bear arms. This was to be a meritocracy after all, and a warrior society to boot, for in his eyes none were nobler than a warrior bearing arms to defend the society they led. He felt the army structure of the SLDF was deeply tainted and did away with lances, with standard military organization and hierarchies. He dreamed up a new way to fight, a new way to wage war, far from the perceived barbarism of inner-sphere practices. The new clan organization was fairly simple, using schoolyard rules of arithmetic. 5 mech warriors made a star, 2 stars a binary, 4 binaries a cluster, several clusters to a galaxy. Rank structures were similarly reformed. There was to be, in theory, at least no more militaristic glorification of the individual, no grand reward for being an exceptional individual, save for being tested again and again in order to attain a higher level of responsibility, and tests further to ensure you were worthy of keeping that position.
The fact that the clans play American football is hilarious to me, by the way, because American football, I'm pretty sure, is like exclusive to America, pretty much. Like, there's a few other countries that play like rugby, but like 99% of American football games are played in America. Not to say that I don't think that the sport won't survive into space or something like that, but I do think it's funny.
Only the very best would do for his ruling elite, regardless of their life up to that point. Only the ability to excel on the field of combat was important for what would become a warrior caste. Yes, Nicholas Kerensky was intent on saving the society of the Inner Sphere by imposing a caste system. The warrior caste would be a ruling elite made of the sharpest minds, the strongest bodies, and the most exceptional talents in the conduct of war.
I think also that is just an inherently funny thing. Like, we are going to do better than the Inner Sphere. The Inner Sphere only does war. So what are we going to do? I know. We're going to make a warrior system. I know he has brain damage, but god dang it, Nicholas. Go to your room.
Against each other in continual trials, to allow only the strongest to endure would form a society of seemingly peerless combatants. I will say that admirably enough. Nicholas Kerensky submitted to these rigorous trials himself and excelled enough that by June of 2815, he had declared himself Il Khan, supreme leader of the clans.
Okay. But he is also manipulative. Who's to say he didn't falsify those tests or had them falsified? Who's to say he didn't just steal another person's glory? He's done it before. It wouldn't be out of character.
At least, that's what their history says.
Mm-hmm. Also, Muscle Mommy, fix your hand though, sweetheart. Good lord.
A history I must note again, that he had a hand in writing.
Yep.
Now, with 20 clans of 40 warriors each, initially that covers 800 individuals. They were, as the ancient Terran saying goes, the cream of the crop. This warrior class was the end result of generations of horrific warfare, and they were as hardened as humanity could provide. And while a ruling warrior elite was established, the question arose, what about the rest? There were a million civilians wondering what the hell they'd just gotten themselves into, fleeing from devastation and thankful to at least be alive. They were willing to put up with some changes, but Nicholas Kerensky had plans for them as well. Other castes would soon follow.
Oh
But he had
boy.
more pressing issues at the moment. Survival chief among them. So by 2821, 19 years and change after the second Exodus, and 4 short years after establishing himself as supreme ruler of this new warrior society, he decided that it was finally time to fix the issue of the worlds he'd fled. The Pentagon worlds would be the first major trial for his new society. to gain resources, to save face his father's legacy, and prove the legitimacy of not only his leadership, but of the society he'd engineered. He wanted to take back the Pentagon worlds, reclaim the entire forces of the Exodus, and impose this new society upon them. This plan became known as Operation Klondike, and it was a terrifying success. Namely because the extensive preparation, intelligence gathering, and endless battle drill of Nicholas Kerensky's forces. The fighting forces of these new clans had drilled, fought, and competed against each other endlessly in war games that were at times bloody contests between combatants over who was the ultimate warrior that day. For years, endlessly, they had drilled, testing themselves against each other in every possible manner. With every trial undertaken, they were preparing for a full test of their abilities on the fields of battle to come. As Nicholas Kerensky's force...
And fair is fair. Say what you will about the clans, but they are effective on the battlefield. This is at least one part where, you know, fair is fair, they are quite powerful.
Exhaustively prepared themselves for conquest, the Pentagon worlds had waged war among themselves over what dwindling resources remained in the name of whatever heathen cause they could dream up. The Exodus civil war continued in a brutal fashion, unchecked or unchallenged. In the wake of the second Exodus, the survivors of the Pentagon worlds had battled each other without major pause for 20 years. After ferocious conflict, they had generally mismanaged their own situation to the point they were about to collapse. They fought each other with the same relentless ferocity currently unfolding in the inner sphere, acting in many ways to mirror the first succession war in all but scale. Every weapon at their disposal was being used to the fullest of its capabilities. The veterans of the SLDF had fallen into old habits, and using the skills they developed during the American Civil War, they nearly burned each other to cinders to fight for marginally habitable space.
Honestly, I know this is realistic, but what a bunch of idiots.
Kerensky had up-to-date intelligence on the exact condition of each Pentagon world from refugees and from traders now plying the space lanes, and his own vast naval forces reactivated for the invasion itself. 5 separate fleets were sent out, one for each Pentagon world. They would observe and report the situation in detail. Reconnaissance was conducted in phases, and from listening posts clandestinely placed in system, all colony activity was recorded in detail and broadcast back to Ilkhan Nicholas Kerensky.
I have to admit, considering how... considering how he has brain damage and, like, PTSD and a bunch of other stuff, Nicholas is surprisingly effective, all considered. Of course, this is history written by the clans themselves, so for all we know, he's getting credit for things that his underlings have done. But still, god dang.
The clanners plotted the location of all colonial vessels, all spacecraft both active and derelict. All communications and their content was thoroughly analyzed to get a better read on the situation. Slowly, through passive signals intelligence and direct observation, fleets got an exact picture of what was happening. And most importantly, where to strike. Battle planning was exceptionally thorough. Each of the 5 Pentagon worlds would have 4 clans assigned to invade and hold them. The invasion itself was the first clan blitzkrieg, and in essence a true test of Nicholas Kerensky's new society. This operation would showcase what they had learned, as well as the leadership, vision, and wisdom of Nicholas Kerensky. They had cast off the old ways, choosing to devote themselves to the legacy of Kerensky and the dream of a better world. But would it help them here and now? It is worth...
I wonder how deified Kerensky is in the clans. Like, surely he is, like, worshipped like a god almost, right? Like, I would think so anyway. Like you have in, like, something like North Korea with, you know, their rulers. I imagine it's not that different, quite frankly.
Noting that at this point the survivors of the Exodus Civil War piloted barely functional equipment, and while the scale of the Exodus Civil War may have been small, considering it was a small population to start with, it is worth weighing that with the sheer amount of combat experience common throughout the population contained within the Exodus, coupled with the disproportionately immense amount of firepower at their disposal, the casualty numbers were accordingly horrific. The Exodus Civil War had destroyed roughly half the population and reduced the former colonies to total ruin. That's not
Such a waste, honestly, because, yeah, like, so many people died, and yeah, I know, it's a tiny blip compared to what the Inner Sphere does, even on a daily basis, but still, god dang.
to say Nicholas Kerensky's conquest of these worlds went without significant effort or casualties. The stakes were
catapult.
high, his numbers were limited, but this was an ultimate test of an ideology, and if they failed, their belief system would be proven insufficient. And no doubt the survivors of that would, in fashion, turn on each other.
A rare example of a frontline catapult not dying. You know what? Fair enough. Valid. Most frontline, I don't know, are there any SRM catapults? I know there's like a PPC version, and obviously most other catapults are all about LRMs. But yeah.
If they succeeded, however, they would forge a stronger society than they had ever enjoyed since leaving the Inner Sphere. The outcome of this invasion would also shape clanner history in other ways. As stated, it would demonstrate that the new way of organization and thinking trumped the old ways, which had, as demonstrated, significantly weakened their enemies. Secondly, the clans who did well in proving themselves through the invasion would be in positions of significant strength to bargain for additional territories,
Makes sense.
new worlds in the Kerensky cluster, or additional resources from what they captured. But those clans who'd suffered during the invasion or failed to completely accomplish their objectives would be left weakened, and weakness was not something the new world would allow. While the invasion and liberation
Yeah, so they were kind of competing with each other as much as themselves. Also, this looks cool as heck.
of the Pentagon worlds was overwhelmingly a
that.
tactical success, and a further masterstroke of planning and preparation. It was during this time that the clans would suffer a significant loss. Andrei Kerensky died on the 1st of December 2821 in an ambush. Alone, he stood against a reinforced lance, and while he gave a good showing, he was slain by repeated deliberate shots to his cockpit.
This almost looks like he was piloting an urban mech. I assume he wasn't, because that would be interesting. But also, did Nicholas maybe assassinate him? It's quite possible.
With his death, one of the few people who could have shaped the clans in any meaningful way, or at least served as counterbalance to the doings of his brother Nicholas, was now dead. Some would suggest that Nicholas arranged the ambush to be rid of his brother, so that he and he alone could steer the clans. The truth of that is some matter of dispute. It is of historical note, however, that one of the greatest lasting influences on clanner society would be a matter of linguistics. To this
Just in general, like, it's very in character for Nicholas, right? Well, I definitely think it's possible that this was not arranged by him, and it's not necessarily his choice that this happened. Maybe he really loved his brother even. We don't know, really. On the other hand, he was manipulative, a plotter, and definitely somebody who wanted full control over the clans. This is not the kind of person who wants to give any ground to anyone else, not even their brother. So, yeah, I would definitely believe it. If you told me, oh yeah, 100% Nicholas did it, I'd believe you.
day, clanners say F instead of affirmative and neg instead of negative. This was a habit of Andre's from his youth, something he'd passed on, and clanners still keep alive. Post-subjugation, civilians that were...
I wonder how Andre is remembered by clanners. Like, I imagine he's remembered as a sort of, like a minor god in the pantheon sort of thing.
Liberated by these elite warriors were at first thankful for the fighting to be over. They were impressed by the leadership and display of firepower, and they were further grateful that the clanners hunted down the most savage and cruel warlords of the Exodus Civil War and brought them to swift, if brutal, justice. As a curious observation, it is worth noting that the people he liberated hailed Nicholas as his father, as he bore a striking physical resemblance to the great man. Then again, Nicholas had tried to emulate his father in many ways, not leastwise his appearance, as he piloted an Atlas II, where his father had originally led from the front in an Atlas in the early stages of the American Civil War. But it is no great surprise that people mistook him for his father. It had been near 20 years of horrific genocidal conflict that had muddied people's perception of history. All they knew was Kerensky was central to all of this. A Kerensky had led them out here, and now a Kerensky was saving them.
The pantheon is forming.
In light of their liberation and being saved from ruin, they saw Nicholas as the fabled savior Kerensky. And rather than correct these people's misconceptions, he chose to say nothing. Perhaps this fed his ego, or he truly saw himself as an inheritor of his father's greatness, ideology, and power, passing out food and supplies, bringing law and order, and mostly a new way of life, away from what these people had suffered. He slowly managed, in effect, to become the salvation these people so desperately needed. What follows next feeds into that, I believe. Unlike many conquerors throughout history, Nicholas Kerensky had planned for this moment. One of his first acts was to admonish the people, giving them his father's General Order 137 again. Some of them had forgotten about that in the intervening years of warfare. As education took a back seat to the needs of basic survival, he offered them the words of his father as more than a historical article of importance, though, but more as an article of faith.
Yeah, it's very interesting how this is a theme that happens in Battletech, where something starts off as just a normal, everyday thing, as a historical event, and turns into faith. It's very interesting to see it turn into religion. Comstar is a very good example of this, and we'll get into it in another video, I'm sure. But in general, like, that is something I find quite interesting. I also think, on the other side of this, it is very interesting to see that feudalism sometimes be, like, kind of put away in the corner. It's there, don't get me wrong, and it's definitely a big part of the setting, but at times it falls away, and all of a sudden it becomes very modern, in a way.
Nicholas Kerensky didn't just read his father's general order, he applied it to their current situation as one might a parable or guiding piece of philosophy. He preached to the people, interpreting his father's general order as a prophet might signs from heaven. He told them to grow and mature and to act in every way to eliminate the greed within them that had driven them to this path of destruction. He gave the people his father's words as gospel and offered through them a path to salvation. He offered them a road of honor, a belief system, a path that could transcend the misery they had inherited if they tried hard enough. He promised them a future they could take ownership of, and that, one day, when all was well, as his father had dreamed, they could return to the inner sphere and restore the peace of Star League once and for all. And that was something they could believe. After everything they had endured and all of their suffering, it was what they felt was the wisest course of action. This unifying gospel of Kerensky, this renewed belief in their purpose and a new way of life would give meaning to them.
I think it's a very impressive bit of writing here, actually, where it's actually quite believable how the clans come to be. Because, yeah, they basically gave them an out. They gave them a way to be better, effectively, to become more effectively. And I think that's pretty cool. I think that's actually really interesting as well. So yeah, some very good origin writing here, for real.
And why not? After all, Kerensky was their savior at this point. But first they had to tear away the last vestiges of the old world, the old ways. Any remnants of the corrupting, destructive inner sphere ideologies had to be left behind if they were to move forward. By Nicholas's interpretation of his father's wisdom, inherited from father to son, they quickly destroyed all that remained of the old world and any meaningful references to it. They filled their minds with devotion to personal and by extension clan growth. Nicholas Kerensky took the concentrated remnants of the Exodus Civil War and scattered them among the Pentagon worlds so as to never again allow people to congregate along political or cultural lines.
There is fair. That is actually what I was talking about earlier with Genghis Khan. Again, say what you will about Nicholas, but he does seem to be pretty effective about with what he is. That being said, he's a manipulative a-hole as well, and probably a lot of this stuff is giving him more credit than he deserves. But you know.
And the people obeyed. They were traumatized by the Civil War, the Exodus Civil War, and were by now tired of suffering. People's resistance had been completely beat down to a point that they were willing and ready to accept anything that promised a potentially happier tomorrow. Kerensky began shaping his new society as their leader and prophet of his father's wisdom, and communicated his directive often as much through extensive writings and directives. His process was to take the written and recorded words of wisdom from his father and draw from them unique interpretations which would then be applied to this new civilization. For example, General Alexander Kerensky's SLDF Primer, 12 Principles of Command, is more or less the foundational blueprint for the clan's internal bidding process for combat war trials and testing. General Order 137, as interpreted by Nicholas Kerensky, is the basis for the clan justice system. His shaping of society didn't stop there. Over time, he became not only a preacher for his father's vision, but a prophet of its wisdom. From the
By the way, the Jade Falcon being Blackwatch is wild to me. Oh my goodness, I didn't know that. That's wild. Oh dang.
writings, orders, wishes, and publications of General Alexander Kerensky, his son Nicholas wove the tapestry of a new society. The changes to this new world would become increasingly radical as the last vestiges of the inner sphere were swept away into the dustbin of history.
Insert CD2 and press enter to continue. That's amazing. We still have 11 more minutes in the video. Let's see what we have here. Oh boy.
And where precisely those choices would invariably lead is something we'll have to get to next time on part 2 of this lecture series.
I will definitely get to that one probably next week. But also, god dang. I kept a lot today. Oh my god, the recording is at like 3 hours. Jesus. Okay. We will finish up. We'll still do this. Because I am curious about the rest of this video. But god dang.
So for now, class is dismissed, and we will close the book on the clans for now and pick up next time, next lecture. Remember that this will be on the test, and for the love of God, stay away from the clown on the station. He's not haha funny. He's more a Pagliacci on bath salts.
Yeah, that Space Station 30.
Your puny cadets are no match for elemental clan warriors.
Oh my god. I need to watch the cartoon. It seems like a so bad it's good kind of thing. You dare refuse my bachal. Glorious Draconis Combine, Office of Command and
司令
Intelligence.
官、私たちは侵入者に対してあらゆる予防策を講じてきました。半径25マイル以内で私たちに正当な敬意を払わなかった者たちは、その家族やペットも含め全て始末します。
Oh my god.
警備員は境界線上で待機し、戦争計画を妨害しようとする暗殺者、スパイ、または愚か者を破壊する準備ができます。
この音楽は
Oh no.
Macht euch bereit, diesem gottlosen Haufen Keretanern zu zeigen, wie Kriegsverbrechen wirklich aussehen.
Oh no, not German war crimes, no!
Kehrt ein neues Grab hier.
Scab them into a new grave.
Es wird ihnen aber nicht im Mindesten helfen. Sie werden nur sehr erschöpft sterben.
Tonight on WBPL 76.
WBPL 76 presents Community Service Theater. Duncan Fisher in William Shakespeare's Macbeth.
That's
Oh,
right.
God.
Thanks to the court settlement, we have Duncan Fisher
They're appearing to defer criminal charges.
as Macbeth. And I do mean that literally. He's every role.
Yes. Hello, everybody. This is Duncan Fisher.
I feel so bad, and at the same time, I'm so jealous of this voice actor.
I'm doing Macbeth. Sure. Let's pick it up where I left off. Methought I heard a voice cry, "Sleep no more! Macbeth does murder sleep. The innocent sleep. Sleep that knits up the raveled sleeve of..."
When the dawn breaks, how shall ye break your fast? The new McDonald's Macbeth. The only sandwich with meat taken from a cow that had trusted the butcher with its very life.
Care. The death of each day's life. Sore labor's bath. Balm of hurt minds. Great nature's second course. Chief nourisher in life's feast. Speaking of, if you want a feast in life, you ought to order McPale. Fits into fits into any mech cockpit. Then whole.
A meal fit for a warrior. Warning, live animal inside. Contains less than 2% fiberglass. Oh my god.
As much food as you can eat. And boy, is there a lot of it. It's just chock full of vitamins and things. Now with less chalk. McPale, from the makers of Bag of Glass and Box of Farts. Yeah, fucking sweet. I ace that shit. Reminds me of this one time where I was in the Valhalla Club getting totally tanked.
Is he wasted? He sounds drunk.
This guy came in and he
Not
just...
the end of the play. You can't go off script. This is only Act 2.
Act 2? Jesus Christ, how long is this piece of shit? It's a tale told by an idiot. Wait. Don't I get to stab anybody else? This thing's boring as hell.
I mean, Macbeth did stab a lot of people.
All the cool shit happens off screen. Who wrote this anyway?
William Shakespeare, Jesus Christ, just stick to the script.
I cast Fireball.
Hey, Discount Dan here, and let me tell you about my new business. Discount Dan's Pretty Above Board House of Bargains. Why'd I call it Discount Dan's Pretty Above Board House of Bargains? Because if you call it Discount Dan's big old pile of rusted broken shit, nobody shows up. Nobody. Not even the people looking for the mountain of cocaine that surely doesn't exist under the pile. Or does it? I don't know, but I'm passing the savings on to you. Let me tell you what I got in this pile. I got all sorts of things that I bulldozed out of the Steiner arena. All sorts of things. Mech parts, mech seats, mech decals, mech rust, genuine mech rust. And it's all sold by the pound. By the pound. Can you imagine what you might find? This is genuine, grade D scrap that may or may not contain the barely conscious remains of mech warriors too stupid to eject. But don't take my word for it.
I found a needle with my foot. I need a doctor.
What am I watching?
There's this guy dragging himself out of the pile. The Discount Dan just dragged him back and said, "Not so fast, fucko. I think he needs to go to the hospital."
I found this really cool boot, but there's a foot in it. There was a really cool piece of metal that said Clan Snake Cobra, and you know, Discount Dan helped me put it in my truck. Then he drove away in my truck, and I kinda want it back.
Look at those finds.
You know, if Tex doesn't know about Alpha Busa, I need to introduce him to it. Because this feels like exactly Alpha Busa, like, humor. Holy heck.
Satisfied customer testimonials that I didn't record without their knowledge. Good job, people, for saying words with your mouthholes. Speaking of mouthholes, boy, do I have some greasy porn straight from Canopus.
Okay.
I fight my enemies because that's what I'm paid to do. I never hesitate to act or even think it through. I'd retire any day, but I spend too much on guns and horse. I ain't gonna drop no more.
So that happened. Well, that was certainly something at the end there. Hope you guys enjoyed. I quite liked it as well. I quite liked reading about her, learning about the clans and everything. Tex has a very nice voice. I can just fall asleep to, absolutely. But yeah, honestly, had a really good time with it overall. And well, if you are a member, you can see yourself scrolling in the background. And a very special thank you to our very important planet, Aku. And of course, Tato, Orlan Dog, Vreed, Any Cute Puppy, and Alex the DM over on Ko-Fi for your support. Thank you all very much for watching. I hope you all enjoyed it. This was a very long video that was like, I think like over 3 hours long. Good lord. I hope I added something to Tex's shenanigans. And, well, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you all in the next one. Bye-bye!